Hey everybody, this is Sleepy Crime, and today I'm gonna help you. I know you want to fall asleep to this video, so before you do, put a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. By the way, where are you from and what time are you watching? Make yourself comfortable and relax. Lassie Denise Peterson, born on May 4th, 1975, in Modesto, California, was the daughter of Sharon Rocha and Dennis Rocha. After her parents divorced, Lacey was primarily raised by her mother and stepfather, Ron Gransky. Described as energetic, personable, and affectionate, Lacey graduated from California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, where she met Scott Lee Peterson, a fellow student studying agricultural business. The couple married in August 1997 and settled in Modesto in 2000, purchasing a single-story home on Covina Avenue. By 2002, Lacey was 8 months pregnant with their first child, a boy they intended to name Connor. She was 27 years old and working part-time as a substitute teacher while preparing for motherhood. Her due date was estimated to be February 10th, 2003. Friends and family noted her enthusiasm for decorating the nursery and preparing for Christmas. The Petersons appeared outwardly stable, with photos from the time often showing them smiling and together. On the morning of December 24th, 2002, Christmas Eve, Scott Peterson claimed he last saw his wife around 9:30 a.m. According to his statement, Lacey was dressed in black maternity pants and a white shirt, preparing to take their golden retriever, Mackenzie, for a walk in the park. Scott said he left the house shortly afterward to go fishing alone at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles away. That same morning, a neighbor found the Petersons' dog wandering the neighborhood, with its leash still attached, and returned it to the backyard. Around 5:15 p.m., Lacey's stepfather, Ron Gransky, reported her missing after Scott called Sharon Rocha and informed her that Lacey had not returned home. Sharon dialed 911. Responding officers arrived at the Peterson home shortly afterward and began an initial search. Police observed nothing visibly disturbed inside the house. Lacey's purse, keys, and sunglasses were still there. The dining table was set for a family Christmas dinner. Scott was calm and cooperative, recounting his day. After fishing, he said he had showered and washed his clothes before noticing Lacey was not home. As night fell, concern intensified. Family and friends assembled in Modesto and began canvassing the neighborhood. The search quickly escalated. Flyers were printed, volunteers mobilized, and local news outlets began airing information about the missing woman. Within 24 hours, Lacey Peterson's face would be broadcast across television screens nationwide. At the time of her disappearance, Lacey was 5 feet 1 inch tall, weighing about 153 pounds, with brown hair and eyes. Police described her pregnancy as visibly advanced. The fact that she went missing on Christmas Eve, during daylight hours in a quiet neighborhood, made the case both confounding and alarming. By the end of December 24th, local law enforcement treated Lacey's disappearance as suspicious. Scott's account of his activities was noted carefully. With no signs of forced entry, robbery, or a struggle, police began documenting every detail from that morning. In the early hours of the investigation, nothing conclusively indicated foul play. Yet, there were already discrepancies, particularly regarding Scott's timeline and the location he visited. Public concern and media attention would continue to grow in the following days. But for those closest to Lacey, the night of December 24th marked the beginning of a nightmare. By the morning of December 25th, 2002, Lacey Peterson's disappearance had escalated into a full-scale search effort. Modesto police detectives, assisted by local volunteers, conducted door-to-door inquiries across the neighborhood. They also began checking nearby parks and waterways. The community responded rapidly. Hundreds of flyers bearing Lacey's photo and description were distributed across Stanislaus County. Local businesses placed missing person posters in windows. Family and friends organized a command post at a nearby park to coordinate volunteer searches. Detectives interviewed Scott Peterson in more detail on Christmas morning. He repeated his timeline. He had left the house around 9:30 a.m. to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina, arriving there around 12:30 p.m. He said he launched his aluminum boat into the bay and returned in the early afternoon. He showed police a parking receipt as evidence of his visit. Scott told investigators that when he returned home, Lacey was gone, and their dog was in the yard with the leash still on. Police began to focus on the timeline. The marina was 90 miles from Modesto, raising questions about the practicality of a solo fishing trip on Christmas Eve. Investigators checked security footage from the marina. It showed Scott's presence, although he appeared alone. Police also noted the lack of fishing equipment details in Scott's initial statements. He had mentioned fishing for sturgeon, but had no bait or tackle that matched that claim. Meanwhile, media coverage intensified. Local television stations covered the story by December 26th, and by December 27th, national networks such as CNN and MSNBC were reporting it. Lacey's face appeared on America's Most Wanted, drawing national attention. Public sympathy was high, and volunteerism soared. Search dogs, helicopters, mounted units, and divers joined the effort. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from local businesses and analyzed Lacey's cell phone records. They sought information from anyone who might have seen her walking Mackenzie that morning, but no verified sightings emerged. Police questioned neighbors, some of whom remembered seeing Mackenzie roaming alone. A nearby resident, Karen Service, told police she found the dog around 10:18 a.m. and returned him to the backyard. That placed Mackenzie alone, far earlier than Scott had suggested Lacey left the house. This discrepancy became one of several details scrutinized in the investigation. Lacey's family stood by Scott Peterson initially. Sharon Rocha and Ron Gransky appeared alongside him in early press conferences. They described Lacey as a devoted daughter and excited mother-to-be, emphasizing that she would not have left voluntarily. At this stage, there were no formal suspects, and police treated the case as a missing person investigation. As the days passed, detectives began background checks on those close to Lacey. They examined phone records, computer logs, and financial transactions. A search warrant for the Peterson home was executed. Police removed computers, vehicles, and other items for forensic examination. Cadaver dogs were brought in and reportedly showed interest in Scott's boat and warehouse. Still, no physical evidence tying Scott or anyone else to foul play had been uncovered. Scott's demeanor during this period drew quiet attention from investigators. While he appeared cooperative in interviews, some noted that he did not participate in the physical searches for Lacey. He told police he was staying with his family and managing media inquiries. Investigators noted these details but did not publicize suspicions. On December the 31st, 2002, a vigil was held at East La Loma Park in Modesto. Hundreds gathered. Scott Peterson stood near the front with Lacey's family. That night, police told reporters they still hoped Lacey was alive, but were preparing for all possibilities. The case was no longer seen as an ordinary disappearance. The reward for information reached $500,000 by early January. Despite the massive effort, no solid leads or credible sightings had emerged. Lacey's car remained in the driveway. Her wallet, keys, and cell phone had been untouched since the morning she vanished. No ransom notes, no witnesses, no physical evidence had surfaced. By mid-January 2003, Scott Peterson's movements and statements had become central to the investigation. Detectives continued gathering data quietly, while presenting the case to the public as unresolved and open-ended. Yet behind the scenes, focus was tightening on the last person known to see Lacey Peterson alive. As 2003 began, Modesto police quietly escalated their scrutiny of Scott Peterson. Though publicly still a supportive husband, Scott's actions began to diverge from expectations. Investigators noted his limited involvement in physical searches and observed what they described as unusual detachment. They maintained close contact with the Rocha family while gathering data on Scott's movements and statements. On January 3rd, police executed a search warrant on the Petersons' warehouse where Scott had kept his fishing boat. Investigators collected tools, fibers, and samples for forensic testing. Cadaver dogs again showed interest in both the boat and a tarp inside, although these alerts were not considered conclusive evidence. A subsequent forensic analysis would later reveal no blood or DNA in the boat. Detectives continued interviewing friends and relatives. Lacey's mother, Sharon Rocha, and her stepfather, Ron Gransky, grew increasingly troubled by Scott's behavior. According to public records, Scott refused to take a polygraph test, despite earlier statements indicating willingness. While polygraph tests are not admissible in court, refusal is often seen by investigators as a red flag. Scott's actions during early January further raised concern. He sold Lacey's Land Rover and inquired about selling their home. He also changed his appearance by dyeing his hair blonde. According to police, these actions were unexpected for someone whose pregnant wife had been missing for less than a month. He continued to communicate with detectives but avoided some media engagements. Meanwhile, Modesto police worked with the FBI and other agencies to develop a detailed timeline. They examined Scott's fishing trip, including the boat purchase, only weeks before Lacey disappeared, and found it unusual that Lacey's family had not known he even owned a boat. Receipts and surveillance footage from December 24th were compared to phone and computer records. On January 17, 2003, Modesto police publicly named Scott Peterson as a person of interest. While not charged, he was now the focus of the investigation. Police cited inconsistencies in his story and new evidence they were evaluating. That same day, detectives met with the Rocha family privately. They explained that they believed Lacey was no longer alive, a conclusion based on the passage of time, lack of credible sightings, and other investigative leads. Privately, detectives were pursuing leads on Scott's private life. They had received an anonymous tip earlier in January that he had been involved in an extramarital relationship prior to Lacey's disappearance. Investigators confirmed the existence of a woman named Amber Frey, a Fresno massage therapist who had been dating Scott under the impression he was single. According to Frey, they had met in early November 2002 through a mutual friend. Scott told her he had lost his wife and was going through his first Christmas without her, statements made before Lacey vanished. Amber Frey contacted Modesto police on December 30th. After learning of Scott's true identity, she agreed to cooperate fully with investigators. Beginning in early January, she recorded multiple phone conversations with Scott under police supervision. These tapes would become central to the case. Police kept her identity secret during this period, while they continued collecting evidence. As the investigation intensified, the public remained unaware of this development. The Rocha family was also not immediately informed about Amber Frey. Scott continued to maintain his innocence in media interviews, including a televised appearance on January 28th, where he repeated his version of the events on the day Lassie disappeared. He acknowledged being at the Berkeley Marina and again denied any involvement in her disappearance. By February, the search for Lacey had become one of the largest in California history. Police used sonar and dive teams to scan the San Francisco Bay near where Scott claimed to have fished. The terrain was difficult. Strong currents and murky waters made recovery efforts complex. No body had yet been found, but the area's proximity to the fishing location kept it a key focus. At this stage, public opinion was beginning to shift. Media outlets speculated about Scott's behavior, and coverage of the case became a daily feature on national television. The press began reporting unverified tips and rumors, some of which complicated the investigation. Modesto police urged the public to remain cautious and refrain from drawing conclusions based on speculation. Nevertheless, with no new physical evidence and no recovery of Lacey or Connor Peterson's remains, authorities were still months away from filing charges. Yet, within law enforcement circles, the investigation had already turned a corner. With recorded calls from Amber Frey, behavioral red flags, and a timeline undercutting Scott's alibi, the groundwork for a criminal case was steadily taking shape. By February 2003, the Lacey Peterson case had become a dominant national story. Cable networks, newspapers, and local stations covered every development. The combination of a missing pregnant woman, a seemingly picture-perfect couple, and mounting suspicion around Scott Peterson drew intense public interest. The media transformed the case into a high-profile mystery, often drawing parallels to previous crimes involving missing women. News vans lined Covina Avenue in Modesto. Journalists staked out the Peterson home, filming Scott's movements and interviewing neighbors. Major outlets including CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC began daily coverage. Commentators dissected Scott's interviews, his demeanor, and inconsistencies in his statements. Cable news hosts featured panels of legal experts, some openly speculating on his guilt before formal charges were filed. On February 10th, what would have been Lassie's due date, a vigil was held in Modesto. Family members and volunteers gathered to honor her memory and maintain awareness. Sharon Rocha spoke briefly, reiterating their hope for Lacey's safe return. Scott Peterson was absent from the event. His absence did not go unnoticed by the public or media, and it became a point of criticism. Reporters began questioning whether he was still acting as a husband desperate to find his wife. As media scrutiny intensified, Scott made several televised appearances. On January 28th, he appeared on Good Morning America, interviewed by Diane Sawyer. He maintained his innocence, stated he had told police everything he knew, and insisted he wanted Lacey home. When asked about his relationship with Amber Frey, he admitted to the affair, stating, "Yes, I had an affair. It was not a committed relationship." This admission was the first public confirmation of the extramarital relationship, and it ignited a new wave of media interest. Amber Frey's identity became public shortly after. On February 19th, she held a press conference alongside her attorney, Gloria Allred. In a brief statement, Frey acknowledged her relationship with Scott, clarified that she had believed he was single, and explained she had contacted police as soon as she learned about Lacey's disappearance. She pledged her full cooperation and urged the public to focus on finding Lacey. Amber's statement was widely praised, and she was viewed by many as a key witness. Following the press conference, media coverage began focusing heavily on Scott's behavior and Frey's recordings. Leaked details from the calls suggested Scott continued to mislead Amber even after Lacey was missing. In one call, recorded on New Year's Eve, he told Frey he was in Paris, even though phone records placed him in Modesto. These recordings were not yet released to the public, but reporters quoted unnamed sources describing them as damaging. Tabloids and talk shows ran daily updates. Photographs of Lacey smiling, her hands resting on her pregnant belly, became iconic. Commentators speculated on Scott's motives, finances, and psychological state. Some outlets featured interviews with former acquaintances, describing him as calm but secretive. Others questioned the early timeline of events, especially the fishing trip. The Rocha family, initially supportive of Scott, gradually distanced themselves. Publicly, they began referring to him less frequently and focused on Lacey and Connor. Sharon Rocha spoke at multiple events, urging the public to keep looking for her daughter. Behind the scenes, her faith in Scott's innocence had eroded. By March, police had shared information with her that was not public, further shifting her perspective. The case had become so prominent that tips poured in from across the country. The Modesto Police Department fielded thousands of calls. Some tips pointed to sightings of Lacey in other states. Others were baseless claims. Still, every credible lead was checked. Police traveled to Nevada and as far as Canada to investigate, but no confirmed sightings emerged. The public's perception of Scott changed dramatically between December and March. Polls conducted by media outlets showed a growing number of people believed he was involved in Lacey's disappearance. Defense attorneys not affiliated with the case criticized Scott's interviews, calling them damaging. Prosecutors and police remained publicly silent, careful not to reveal the status of the investigation. In this environment, law enforcement continued building its case. Forensic analysis of the boat, the Petersons' home, and their vehicles continued. Meanwhile, sonar scans of the San Francisco Bay resumed. Though no remains had been recovered, investigators were convinced that if foul play had occurred, the bay was the likely location for disposal. By April, 4 months after Lacey's disappearance, media saturation reached its peak. Public opinion had turned decisively against Scott Peterson, and authorities were preparing for the possibility that the next development would be not a rescue, but a recovery. The revelation of Scott Peterson's affair with Amber Frey significantly altered the trajectory of the investigation into Lacey Peterson's disappearance. What had begun as a missing person case increasingly pointed toward a potential homicide, with Scott as the central figure. Amber Frey's decision to come forward and cooperate with police added a critical dimension to the case and gave investigators a new narrative, one they believed could explain motive. Amber Frey, a single mother and massage therapist from Fresno, had met Scott Peterson in November 2002 through a mutual friend. According to her later court testimony and press statements, Scott told her he was single and looking for a serious relationship. The two began dating, and Frey said Scott was affectionate, attentive, and never mentioned being married. In early December, Scott spoke of traveling internationally, telling Frey he would be in Europe over the holidays. It was only after Lacey Peterson's disappearance was reported in the media that Amber learned the truth. A friend recognized Scott on television and informed her. Frey immediately contacted Modesto police. On December 30th, 2002, she met with detectives and agreed to assist the investigation. She allowed police to monitor and record her phone conversations with Scott, hoping to uncover additional information. Between December 30th and early February, Amber recorded over a dozen calls. In them, Scott made no mention of Lacey or the investigation. He maintained the deception, claiming to be traveling in Paris or at a New Year's celebration in Europe despite being in California. In one call recorded on December 31st, the night of the Modesto Vigil, Scott told Amber he was watching fireworks in Paris near the Eiffel Tower. At that exact time, he had been in Modesto, attending the vigil for his missing wife. The recordings captured Scott making romantic overtures, discussing plans for the future, and continuing to deny having a wife. Investigators saw this as key evidence. While they had no direct proof of foul play, the tapes portrayed Scott as unconcerned with the ongoing search and deeply involved in deceiving Frey. To prosecutors, the affair suggested motive, an attempt to escape domestic obligations, including impending fatherhood for a new life. Amber Frey's decision to come forward was kept secret for several weeks. When her identity was eventually disclosed in mid-February, she addressed the media briefly, confirming her cooperation with law enforcement. She stated, "I am a single mother. I was told he was unmarried. As soon as I learned who he was, I contacted the police." Her candor earned her public sympathy, and she avoided the blame often directed at individuals in similar situations. The emergence of the affair changed how the public viewed Scott Peterson. Previously viewed as a grieving husband, he was now widely seen as a man living a double life. Public opinion shifted swiftly. Media commentators focused heavily on the romantic deception, and national programs began referring to Scott as the primary suspect, though no formal charges had been filed. For investigators, the tapes confirmed a pattern of dishonesty. Police compared Scott's statements to Frey with those given in his interviews. They noted contradictions and inconsistencies. Moreover, they believed Scott's effort to mislead Amber, even after Lacey's disappearance, pointed to a consciousness of guilt. The Rocha family was briefed by police about the recordings before they became public. Sharon Rocha later said that learning about the affair devastated her and changed her perception of Scott entirely. The family had supported him during the early days of the search, even sharing the stage with him at vigils and media events. But after the affair was revealed, they ceased all public contact with him. Behind the scenes, the district attorney's office was preparing to move forward. While no physical evidence had yet tied Scott Peterson to Lacey's disappearance, prosecutors believed they had assembled a compelling circumstantial case. The affair, the fishing trip, and Scott's increasingly erratic behavior formed a pattern they believed jurors would find persuasive. On March 5th, Modesto police publicly confirmed that Scott Peterson was no longer merely a person of interest, but was being treated as a suspect. Investigators emphasized that the case remained active and ongoing, and they renewed appeals to the public for any information, particularly sightings or leads related to San Francisco Bay. Though no body had been recovered, prosecutors believed Lacey and Connor Peterson were dead. The challenge was proving it. Without direct physical evidence, the case would hinge on motive, opportunity, and Scott's actions before and after the disappearance. Amber Frey, now central to the case, continued working with law enforcement while preparing to testify if charges were filed. Meanwhile, media pressure remained unrelenting. Analysts dissected every new detail, and news programs often replayed the now infamous phone call between Scott and Amber on New Year's Eve. Public outrage grew. Though legally presumed innocent, Scott Peterson had already been tried in the court of public opinion. Yet, despite growing circumstantial evidence, authorities knew they needed more, preferably a body, to file charges. For now, the case remained open, the search ongoing, and Lacey Peterson's fate still officially unresolved. On April 13, 2003, More than 3.5 months after Lacey Peterson vanished, a passerby walking along a rocky shoreline of the San Francisco Bay in Richmond, California, discovered the body of a male fetus. The location was about a mile north of the Berkeley Marina, where Scott Peterson had said he had gone fishing the day Lassie disappeared. The fetus was well preserved and appeared to be near full term. The umbilical cord was still attached. The following day, April 14th, a badly decomposed female torso, missing head, arms, most of both legs, and internal organs, washed ashore nearby. Authorities responded immediately. The bodies were taken to the Contra Costa County coroner for examination. Though the torso was too decomposed to allow a definitive identification on site, clothing remnants and the location led investigators to believe the remains were connected to the Peterson case. The fetus was consistent in size with Lacey's gestational timeline, and the proximity of the two bodies to each other and to the marina where Scott had launched his boat raised alarm. On April 18, 2003, preliminary forensic tests confirmed the suspicions. DNA testing matched the female torso to Lacey Peterson and the fetus to her unborn son, Connor. News of the identification broke quickly, prompting widespread media coverage. Crowds gathered at memorial sites, and reporters swarmed Modesto and the Berkeley Marina. The confirmation that Lacey and Connor were dead marked a turning point in the investigation. Within hours of the DNA confirmation, police moved to arrest Scott Peterson. Surveillance teams had been monitoring him for weeks, fearing he might flee if the bodies were found and publicly identified. Scott had been staying in La Jolla at the home of his parents and was under near constant observation. On April 18th, around 11:20 a.m., Scott was arrested by the California Highway Patrol near a golf course in La Jolla. He was driving a Mercedes-Benz registered to his family. Inside the vehicle, officers found multiple cell phones, camping equipment, over $10,000 in cash, his brother's identification, and a map to the U.S.-Mexico border. His hair had been dyed blonde, and his appearance was significantly altered. Police stated as they believed he had been preparing to flee to Mexico. Later that day, the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office announced that Scott Peterson had been charged with 2 counts of murder, one for Lacey and one for Connor. Under California law, killing a fetus over a certain gestational age could qualify as a separate homicide. The charges included special circumstances, multiple murders, which made the case eligible for the death penalty. In the days following the arrest, authorities released details from the autopsies. The fetus had 1.5 loops of tape around the neck and a torn piece of nylon tape around the body. The mother's torso showed signs of damage consistent with prolonged water exposure and possible post-mortem dismemberment. Due to the advanced decomposition, the cause of death for Lacey could not be conclusively determined, but the state believed the evidence was consistent with homicide. Media coverage of the discovery and arrest was immediate and overwhelming. Helicopters followed the transport of Scott from Southern California to Modesto. Cable news carried live updates, and crowds gathered outside the jail. Prosecutors said they believed Scott had killed Lacey at home on the night of December 23rd or early morning of December 24th, then transported her body to the marina and dumped it from his fishing boat. Searches of Scott's computer history revealed that he had looked up tide charts for the Berkeley Marina before Lacey's disappearance. While not illegal, prosecutors viewed this as part of a premeditated plan. They also highlighted Scott's purchase of a small fishing boat just weeks before the disappearance, which he had kept secret from Lacey's family and friends. The discovery of the remains finally provided physical evidence linking Scott to a potential crime scene. Though the bodies had been in the water for months, and direct forensic links to Scott were absent, prosecutors believed the location and timing of the recovery supported their theory. They also believed that the damage to the remains, consistent with dismemberment and weighted submersion, indicated deliberate concealment. Following the arrest, Lacey's family issued a statement thanking the public and law enforcement for their efforts and expressing grief and relief that Lacey and Connor had been found. They asked for privacy and made no immediate public comments on Scott's arrest. Sharon Rocha later said in interviews that she had always hoped to find her daughter alive, but had feared this outcome. Scott Peterson was booked into Stanislaus County Jail without bail. His arraignment was scheduled for April 21st. Legal analysts began debating the strength of the evidence. While circumstantial, the case included motive, opportunity, behavior after the fact, and now, bodies found in the same bay where Scott had claimed to fish. The arrest marked the end of one phase of the case and the beginning of another. The investigation was no longer about finding a missing woman. It had become a double murder prosecution, with the eyes of the nation watching closely. Scott Peterson's arrest on April 18, 2003, followed the discovery and DNA confirmation of the remains of Lacey Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. Law enforcement had tracked his movements for weeks, concerned he might flee if confronted with conclusive forensic evidence. His capture in La Jolla, California, underscored those fears. Police said he had been driving erratically and appeared to be avoiding surveillance. Inside his car, authorities found survival gear, 4 cell phones, nearly $15,000 in cash, a backpack with camping supplies, and a map to Mexico. His appearance had changed noticeably. Scott's hair was bleached blonde, and he had grown a beard. Investigators viewed the change as a sign he was attempting to disguise himself. Also found were multiple credit cards, his brother's driver's license, and clothing that did not belong to him. To prosecutors, the contents of the vehicle indicated clear intent to flee the jurisdiction. The public, already critical of Scott, saw the arrest details as further confirmation of guilt. Following his arrest, Scott was booked into Stanislaus County Jail on suspicion of 2 counts of murder. On April 21st, he appeared in court for his arraignment. Wearing a bulletproof vest under his jail-issued clothing, he pleaded not guilty to both charges. The Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office announced it would seek the death penalty, citing special circumstances, multiple homicides, and the death of a fetus during the commission of a felony. Lacey's family sat in the courtroom during the arraignment, silent and composed. Sharon Rocha stared forward throughout, declining to speak to reporters afterward. Outside the courthouse, large crowds gathered. Some held signs calling for justice. Others denounced Scott. The case had become a national spectacle, and security was tight. Prosecutors began presenting their preliminary case. They emphasized circumstantial evidence, Scott's shifting timeline, his affair with Amber Frey, the suspicious boat trip, and his lack of participation in searches. They also pointed to his purchase of the boat, which he had hidden from Lacey and her family. Amber Frey's recorded phone calls, obtained under police supervision, were also cited. In these conversations, recorded after Lacey disappeared, Scott continued to lie about his marital status and location, even as he appeared at vigils for his missing wife. In early May, Scott's defense team requested a change of venue, arguing that pretrial publicity in Modesto made a fair trial impossible. The court agreed. In January 2004, the California Supreme Court approved moving the trial to San Mateo County, south of San Francisco. The judge ruled that extensive media coverage had created a presumption of prejudice in Stanislaus County. Jury selection would now take place outside Modesto. Meanwhile, Scott remained in custody without bail. Jail records showed he was placed in protective custody, isolated from the general inmate population due to the high-profile nature of the case. Attorneys on both sides began preparing for a lengthy trial. Prosecutors built a narrative focused on motive and planning, highlighting Scott's financial situation, the pressures of impending fatherhood, and his extramarital affair. They argued that Scott wanted freedom from responsibility and that Lacey and Connor's deaths were the result. Defense attorneys, led by Mark Geragos, countered with the absence of direct forensic evidence. No blood, DNA, or eyewitness testimony connected Scott to the act of murder. The case, they argued, was entirely circumstantial. Geragos also criticized the police investigation, claiming detectives had focused solely on Scott from the beginning, ignoring other leads and possible suspects. The media closely followed every legal motion. Court documents were analyzed in nightly news segments. Legal experts debated the admissibility of evidence, including the wiretapped calls between Scott and Amber. The defense team filed several motions to exclude statements Scott made before his arrest, arguing he had not been advised of his rights. The court reviewed each motion, but most were denied. Meanwhile, the Rocha family worked to keep Lacey and Connor's memory present. They established a foundation and began advocating for legislative changes to protect unborn victims of violence. Their efforts contributed to the introduction of the Federal Unborn Victims of Violence Act, later signed into law in 2004. In June 2003, preliminary hearings began. Prosecutors presented evidence tying Scott to the timeline, including phone records, financial transactions, and the purchase of the fishing boat. The court ruled there was sufficient evidence for a trial. A trial date was set for 2004, nearly 2 years after Lacey's disappearance. As the pre-trial phase ended, the case stood at a critical juncture. The state believed it had constructed a compelling circumstantial case, rooted in motive and opportunity. The defense insisted that suspicion was not proof, and that no definitive link connected Scott to the deaths. The stage was set for what would become one of the most closely watched criminal trials of the decade. The trial of Scott Peterson began on June 1, 2004, in Redwood City, San Mateo County, after a venue change due to intense media coverage in Modesto. Presiding Judge Alfred DeLucchi oversaw the proceedings. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Rick DiStasso and Deputy DA Dave Harris, pursued 2 charges: first-degree murder for the death of Lacey Peterson and second-degree murder for their unborn son, Connor. The defense, led by attorney Mark Geragos, maintained Scott's innocence, emphasizing the lack of physical evidence directly linking him to the alleged crimes. Jury selection took months. Due to pretrial publicity, it was difficult to find jurors without prior opinions. After screening more than 1,000 candidates, a panel of 6 men and 6 women was seated. Judge DeLucchi instructed jurors to avoid media coverage and not discuss the case. Nevertheless, the trial's proceedings were heavily covered by national outlets, with legal analysts offering daily commentary. The prosecution opened by outlining their theory. Scott Peterson killed Lacey in their Modesto home on the night of December the 23rd or morning of December 24th, 2002. They argued he then transported her body to the Berkeley Marina and dumped it from his boat into the San Francisco Bay. The motive, prosecutors said, was freedom from marriage, fatherhood, and financial responsibilities, so Scott could pursue a relationship with Amber Frey. Key evidence included Scott's affair, which prosecutors said indicated intent to escape his life with Lacey. Amber Frey testified early in the trial. On the stand, she described their relationship and played recorded phone conversations. These included Scott falsely telling her he was in Europe on New Year's Eve, the same night he appeared at a vigil for Lacey. Her testimony was emotional and widely seen as damaging. The prosecution also called numerous witnesses to establish a timeline. Neighbors testified to finding the Petersons' dog Mackenzie wandering the neighborhood on the morning of December 24th. Investigators presented Scott's alibi, his solo fishing trip, questioning its believability and necessity. They pointed out that he had bought the boat secretly and looked up tide charts for the bay in the days before Lacey's disappearance. Forensic evidence was limited. No blood, fingerprints, or DNA was found linking Scott to a crime scene. However, a single hair consistent with Lacey's DNA was found on pliers in Scott's boat. Prosecutors argued that this, combined with the location of the recovered remains near Scott's reported fishing location, supported their case. A hydrologist testified that tidal patterns made it plausible that the bodies drifted from the dump site to where they were found. The defense countered by attacking the prosecution's timeline and evidence gaps. Mark Geragos argued that the case was entirely circumstantial and suggested Lacey could have been abducted after Scott left home. He highlighted that there were no witnesses to the crime, no forensic evidence proving a murder occurred in the house, and no direct link between Scott and the remains. Geragos proposed that someone else, possibly burglars operating in the neighborhood, was responsible. To support his argument, Geragos called witnesses who claimed to have seen a pregnant woman resembling Lacey walking near the park on the morning of December 24th. The defense also pointed to a reported burglary across the street that same day. However, investigators testified that the burglary occurred 2 days later and found no evidence tying the suspects to Lacey's disappearance. Courtroom drama marked the proceedings. 2 jurors were dismissed during the trial, one for misconduct and another for discussing the case outside court. Alternates replaced them. The judge frequently admonished both legal teams for their conduct, and tensions ran high between attorneys. Throughout the trial, Scott Peterson showed little emotion. He took notes, conferred with his lawyers, and occasionally looked toward his family. He did not testify in his own defense. The defense rested in October 2004, after presenting a significantly shorter case than the prosecution. In closing arguments, prosecutors reiterated their theory of premeditation and motive. They acknowledged the lack of direct evidence, but emphasized the totality of circumstances. Scott's deception, secret boat, shifting stories, and the proximity of the bodies to his fishing route. The defense argued that suspicion was not proof, and cautioned jurors not to convict without concrete evidence. The jury deliberated for over a week. On November 12, 2004, they found Scott Peterson guilty of first-degree murder for Lacey and second-degree murder for Connor. He showed no visible reaction as the verdict was read. Lacey's family wept quietly. Outside the courthouse, crowds cheered. The case, which had gripped the nation for nearly 2 years, had reached a verdict. The sentencing phase followed. On December 13th, the same jury recommended the death penalty. Jurors later cited the totality of evidence and Scott's demeanor throughout the trial as key factors in their decision. On March 16, 2005, Judge DeLucchi formally sentenced Scott Peterson to death by lethal injection and ordered him transferred to San Quentin State Prison. The verdict delivered on November 12, 2004, confirmed what prosecutors had argued for nearly 6 months in court. Scott Peterson was guilty of murdering his wife, Lacey, and their unborn son, Connor. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder in Lacey's death and second-degree murder in the death of Connor. The decision followed a 5-month trial and over 170 witnesses. It was the culmination of nearly 2 years of investigation, media scrutiny, and public debate. Following the verdict, the jury entered the penalty phase to decide whether Scott would face life imprisonment without parole or death. Prosecutors argued for the maximum penalty, citing the calculated nature of the crime, the vulnerability of the victims, and Scott's continued deception during the investigation. The defense presented mitigating factors, including Scott's lack of prior criminal history and the emotional impact on his family. On December 13, 2004, the jury returned a unanimous recommendation. Scott Peterson should receive the death penalty. Jurors later explained their decision, saying the circumstantial evidence, the discovery of the bodies near his fishing location, and his conduct after Lacey's disappearance were key. They also cited the emotional testimony from Lacey's family and Amber Frey's taped phone calls as powerful influences. Formal sentencing took place on March 16, 2005. In a packed courtroom, Judge Alfred DeLucchi upheld the jury's recommendation and sentenced Scott Peterson to death by lethal injection. He also ordered Scott to pay restitution to the Rocha family in the amount of $10,000. In his ruling, DeLucchi described the crime as cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous. Sharon Rocha delivered a victim impact statement. Addressing the court directly, she described the pain of losing her daughter, an unborn grandson, and the betrayal she felt from someone once considered family. Her statement received widespread attention and became one of the most emotional moments of the trial. She said, "Lacey and Connor were innocent and didn't deserve what happened. Scott has shown no remorse." Scott remained silent during the sentencing. As he was escorted out, he looked toward his family but said nothing. Outside the courthouse, hundreds gathered. Reactions were mixed. Some celebrated the verdict as justice, while others criticized the death penalty. News outlets broadcast the sentencing live, and coverage extended internationally. Peterson was transferred shortly after to San Quentin State Prison, where California houses male inmates sentenced to death. His prison number became part of the public record. Though on death row, California had not executed a prisoner since 2006, and legal experts predicted years of appeals ahead. The case had far-reaching effects beyond the courtroom. Public fascination with the trial had been fueled by round-the-clock media coverage, including daily segments on cable networks and true crime programs. Legal commentators debated the impact of the media on the trial's fairness, with some suggesting that the intense scrutiny may have influenced the jury, despite efforts to shield them. The case also had political repercussions. In 2004, Congress passed the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, also known as Lacey and Connor's Law, which recognizes a fetus as a separate victim if killed during the commission of a federal crime. The law, signed by President George W. Bush, was supported by Lacey's family and cited her case as a driving force. In the months following the sentencing, Scott Peterson's legal team began the appeal process. Under California law, all death penalty cases are automatically reviewed by the state's Supreme Court. The defense filed notices of appeal challenging the fairness of jury selection, alleged media bias, and the exclusion of evidence they claimed could support an alternate theory of abduction. Despite his conviction, Peterson maintained his innocence. His attorneys argued that the case was built on speculation and circumstantial details, with no direct forensic link tying him to the murder. They also claimed law enforcement had ignored leads suggesting Lacey may have encountered foul play after Scott left for the marina. In San Quentin, Scott lived in a specialized unit for condemned inmates. His cell, like others on death row, was small and isolated. He was allowed limited recreation time and visits under strict supervision. Media occasionally reported on his prison life, including statements from other inmates and family members who visited him. Lacey and Connor Peterson were buried in a private ceremony attended only by family. The Rocha family continued their advocacy work, focusing on victims' rights and legislation. They also established scholarships in Lassie's name and supported organizations working with families of homicide victims. The verdict and sentencing did not bring closure, but they marked a legal conclusion to one of the most widely followed criminal trials in modern American history. The appeals process would continue, but for many, justice had been served. Following his 2005 sentencing to death, Scott Peterson's legal team initiated a series of appeals, asserting that his trial had been compromised by procedural errors and media influence. In 2020, the California Supreme Court reviewed these claims and upheld Peterson's convictions, but overturned his death sentence. The court found that the trial judge had improperly dismissed prospective jurors solely based on their written opposition to the death penalty, without determining if their views would prevent them from following the law. In December 2021, Peterson was resentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. During the resentencing hearing, Lacey Peterson's family confronted him once more. Sharon Rocha, Lacey's mother, stated, "Lacey and Connor will always be dead, and you will always be their murderer." Peterson's legal battles continued as his defense team filed a habeas corpus petition alleging juror misconduct. They claimed that a juror, referred to as juror number 7, failed to disclose her involvement in prior legal proceedings, including being a crime victim. In October 2020, the California Supreme Court ordered the San Mateo County Superior Court to examine these allegations. In December 2022, Judge Ann Christine Masulo denied Peterson's request for a new trial, concluding that the jurors' omissions did not constitute prejudicial misconduct. Despite these setbacks, Peterson's case garnered renewed attention in 2024 when the Los Angeles Innocence Project took up his case, citing potential new evidence. The organization requested DNA testing on a piece of duct tape found on Lacey's pants. In May 2024, a judge granted permission for this single item to be tested, while denying other requests. In October 2024, the court granted Peterson's defense team access to previously undisclosed evidence, allowing them to conduct further investigations. As of 2025, Scott Peterson remains incarcerated, serving a life sentence without parole. His legal team continues to pursue avenues for a new trial, maintaining his claims of innocence. Chandra Ann Levy, born on April 14, 1977, in Cleveland, Ohio, was a 24-year-old graduate student from Modesto, California. She had completed her master's degree in public administration at the University of Southern California in December 2000. Eager to pursue a career in federal law enforcement, Levy moved to Washington, D.C. in October 2000 to intern at the Federal Bureau of Prisons Public Affairs Office. Her responsibilities included handling media inquiries, notably during the high-profile execution of Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. Levy's internship concluded in April 2001 due to the expiration of her academic eligibility. She planned to return to California in May to attend her graduation ceremony. However, on May 1, 2001, she vanished without a trace. On May 6th, concerned about not hearing from their daughter for several days, Levy's parents contacted the Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, in Washington, D.C. Officers visited her apartment in the DuPont Circle neighborhood, but found no signs of foul play. Her wallet, identification, and mobile phone were left behind, and her suitcases were partially packed. The apartment's answering machine was full, containing messages from family members and 2 from Congressman Gary Condit. Investigators examined Levy's laptop and discovered that on the morning of May 1st, she had searched for information about Rock Creek Park, including a map of the area. Her last recorded activity was at 12:59 p.m. when she looked up Alsace-Lorraine, a region in France. Despite extensive searches, including efforts in Rock Creek Park, no immediate leads emerged. The case garnered national attention, partly due to revelations about Levy's personal life, which would later complicate the investigation. In the weeks following Chandra Levy's disappearance, attention turned to her personal life, particularly her relationship with Congressman Gary Condit, a Democrat representing California's 18th district. Initially, Condit denied any romantic involvement with Levy. However, during a third interview with police, he admitted to having a sexual relationship with her. Levy's aunt, Linda Zamsky, publicly stated that Condit was intimately involved with her niece and criticized his lack of candor, suggesting it hindered efforts to find Chandra. The revelation of the affair intensified media scrutiny and public interest in the case. Despite admitting to the affair, Condit denied any connection to Levy's disappearance. He cooperated with investigators, allowing searches of his apartment and providing statements. Nevertheless, his initial denials and the subsequent admission led to widespread criticism and calls for his resignation. The media coverage was intense, with reporters camping outside Condit's residence and following every development. The focus on the congressman's personal life overshadowed other aspects of the investigation, leading to debates about media ethics and the balance between public interest and sensationalism. Condit's political career suffered significantly. In the 2002 Democratic primary, he lost his seat to Dennis Cardoza, a former aide, effectively ending his tenure in Congress. The affair and its handling had lasting impacts on his public image and political prospects. In the immediate aftermath of Chandra Levy's disappearance, the Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, initiated a search that would later be scrutinized for its shortcomings. On May 6, 2001, officers inspected Levy's DuPont Circle apartment, finding no signs of forced entry or struggle. Her personal belongings, including her wallet and mobile phone, were left behind, suggesting she had not planned an extended absence. Investigators discovered that Levy had used her laptop to search for information about Rock Creek Park on the morning of her disappearance. Despite this clue, initial searches of Rock Creek Park were limited. The MPD conducted a search within 100 yards of each road, due to a miscommunication regarding the intended search parameters, which were supposed to include areas within 100 yards of every trail and path. This oversight meant that significant portions of the park, including remote wooded areas, were not thoroughly examined. As weeks turned into months without significant leads, media attention intensified. The revelation of Levy's affair with Congressman Gary Condit became a focal point, overshadowing other investigative avenues. The media's emphasis on the scandal diverted public attention and resources, leading to criticism that the investigation was being compromised by sensationalism. The Levy family, frustrated by the lack of progress, held vigils and press conferences to keep the case in the public eye. They also hired private investigators to conduct independent searches and analyses. Despite these efforts, Levy's whereabouts remained unknown for over a year, highlighting the challenges and missteps in the early stages of the investigation. On the morning of May 22, 2002, a man walking his dog in Washington, D.C., quote, S. Rock Creek Park, stumbled upon human skeletal remains on a steep wooded slope near Broad Branch Creek. The discovery, approximately 4 miles from Chandra Levy's apartment, marked a significant development in the year-long search for the missing intern. Dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Levy. Alongside the bones, investigators found personal items, including a sports bra, sweatshirt, leggings, tennis shoes, and a portable stereo. The area where Levy's remains were found had not been thoroughly searched previously due to a miscommunication within the Metropolitan Police Department, MPD. While commanders had ordered searches within 100 yards of every trail and path, officers only searched within 100 yards of each road, leaving significant portions of the park unexamined. A preliminary autopsy conducted by D.C. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Jonathan L. Arden revealed damage to Levy's hyoid bone, suggesting possible strangulation. However, the extent of decomposition prevented a definitive determination of the cause of death. Dr. Arden stated, "There's less to work with here than I would like. It's possible we will never know specifically how she died." On June 6, 2002, private investigators hired by the Levy family discovered a shin bone with some twisted wire about 25 yards from the initial site. Police Chief Charles H. Ramsey acknowledged the oversight, stating, "It is unacceptable that these items were not located." The discovery of Levy's remains shifted the investigation's focus back to Rock Creek Park and raised questions about earlier search efforts. Despite the renewed attention, the case remained unsolved, and the circumstances surrounding Levy's death continued to be a subject of intense scrutiny. In the years following Chandra Levy's disappearance and the discovery of her remains, the case remained unsolved, with investigators facing criticism for their handling of the investigation. In 2006, a new team of veteran homicide detectives was assigned to the case, leading to renewed efforts to identify Levy's killer. Attention turned to Ingmar Guandique, a 20-year-old undocumented immigrant from El Salvador, who was serving a 10-year prison sentence for assaulting 2 women in Rock Creek Park around the time of Levy's disappearance. Guandique had a history of violent attacks in the park, and investigators noted similarities between those assaults and the circumstances surrounding Levy's case. In September 2008, investigators searched Guandique's prison cell and found a photo of Levy that he had saved from a magazine. This discovery, along with interviews of acquaintances and witnesses from the other Rock Creek Park incidents, strengthened the case against him. On March 3, 2009, the Superior Court of the District of Columbia issued an arrest warrant for Guandique. He was returned to D.C. custody on April 20th, and 2 days later, he was charged with Levy's murder. A grand jury indicted him on 6 counts, including kidnapping, first-degree murder committed during a kidnapping, attempted first-degree sexual abuse, first-degree murder committed during a sexual offense, attempted robbery, and first-degree murder committed during a robbery. Guandique pleaded not guilty at his arraignment. The trial was initially set for January 27, 2010, but was delayed due to issues with contaminated evidence and jurisdictional challenges related to the search of Guandique's prison cell. The trial eventually commenced on October 4, 2010, at the H. Carl Moultrie Courthouse in Washington, D.C. The trial of Ingmar Guandique for the murder of Chandra Levy commenced on October 18, 2010. in the Superior Court of the District of Columbia, presided over by Judge Gerald Furse Fisher. Assistant U.S. Attorney Fernando Campoamor Sanchez led the prosecution, presenting a case built primarily on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of a jailhouse informant. Key witnesses included Holly Schilling and Christy Wiegand, both victims of assaults by Guandike in Rock Creek Park. Their testimonies established a pattern of violent behavior in the same area where Levy's remains were found. Wiegand recounted being attacked from behind, dragged down a ravine, and threatened with a knife. A pivotal moment in the trial was the testimony of Armando Morales, a former cellmate of Guandike. Morales claimed that Guandike confessed to killing Levy during a robbery attempt, stating that he had not sexually assaulted her. This testimony was crucial, as there was no physical evidence linking Guandike to the crime scene. The defense challenged Morales' credibility, highlighting his history as a gang leader and informant. They argued that Morales had a motive to fabricate the confession to gain favor with prosecutors. Despite these concerns, the jury found Guandike guilty on November 22, 2010, of 2 counts of first-degree felony murder, citing kidnapping and attempted robbery as aggravating circumstances. On February 11, 2011, Guandike was sentenced to 60 years in prison. During the sentencing, he maintained his innocence, stating, "I am sorry for what happened to your daughter," but insisted he was not responsible. Judge Fisher denied a motion for a new trial, emphasizing the danger Guandike posed as a sexual predator. In June 2015, Ingmar Guandike was granted a new trial after revelations emerged that the prosecution's key witness, Armando Morales, had provided false testimony during the 2010 trial. Morales, a former cellmate of Guandike, had claimed that Guandike confessed to killing Chandra Levy. However, it was later discovered that Morales had a history of cooperating with law enforcement, a fact he denied under oath. The defense argued that this information was withheld by prosecutors, undermining the credibility of Morales' testimony. Further complicating the case, in July 2016, secret recordings surfaced in which Morales admitted to fabricating the confession attributed to Guandike. These recordings were made by Babs Prawler, an acquaintance of Morales, who turned them over to authorities. In light of this new evidence, the U.S. Attorney's Office concluded that it could no longer prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, and moved to dismiss the charges against Guandike. On July 28, 2016, Judge Robert E. Morin granted the motion, effectively dropping the case. Following the dismissal, Guandike remained in custody under Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICEs, due to his undocumented status. In May 2017, he was deported to El Salvador. ICE identified him as a documented member of the MS-13 gang, noting tattoos indicative of gang affiliation. The unraveling of Guandike's conviction reignited public interest in the case and raised questions about the integrity of the original investigation and prosecution. The Levy family expressed shock and disappointment at the turn of events, with Chandra's mother, Susan Levy, stating she was in a state of shock upon learning of the case's dismissal. The Chandra Levy case, which began with her disappearance in May 2001, remains one of Washington, D.C., quote, S most perplexing unsolved crimes. Despite extensive investigations, a high-profile trial, and a conviction that was later overturned, no one has been definitively held accountable for her death. Levy's family, particularly her parents, Robert and Susan Levy, endured years of uncertainty and public scrutiny. They became vocal advocates for missing persons, working to improve search efforts and support for families in similar situations. Their advocacy contributed to increased awareness and changes in how missing adult cases are handled by law enforcement agencies. The case also highlighted significant flaws in investigative procedures. Early missteps, such as the mishandling of Levy's laptop and miscommunication regarding search areas in Rock Creek Park, potentially delayed the discovery of crucial evidence. These errors underscored the need for better training and protocols in missing person investigations. The media's intense focus on Levy's relationship with Congressman Gary Condit diverted attention from other investigative avenues. While Condit was never officially named a suspect, the speculation surrounding their association overshadowed the search for other potential leads. This aspect of the case sparked discussions about media responsibility and the impact of sensationalism on criminal investigations. In the years following the dismissal of charges against Ingmar Guandike, no new suspects have been publicly identified. The case remains open, with law enforcement agencies periodically reviewing evidence in hopes of uncovering new information. As of now, the murder of Chandra Levy continues to be an unresolved chapter in the annals of American criminal history. Hannah Elizabeth Graham was an 18-year-old second-year student at the University of Virginia, UVA, originally from Northern Virginia. A graduate of West Potomac High School, she was known for her academic excellence, athleticism, and outgoing personality. At UVA, she studied anthropology and was involved in several extracurricular activities. On the night of Friday, September 12, 2014, Hannah attended a party near the university campus. It was the beginning of a typical college weekend, and she was out socializing with friends. At some point during the evening, she became separated from the group. Between 11:50 p.m. and 12:45 a.m., she sent several text messages, including one to a friend indicating she was lost. Surveillance footage provided the clearest record of her movements after she left the party. At 12:46 a.m., she was seen on camera near McGrady's Irish Pub, located on University Avenue. Just after 1 a.m., she was spotted again on video walking east on the downtown mall, a popular pedestrian area in Charlottesville. Footage captured her passing by Sal's Pizza and walking unsteadily, possibly intoxicated. She was then seen interacting briefly with a man outside of Tempo Restaurant. At 1:06 a.m., she walked past Tuel Jewelers. Minutes later, she was seen with a man in dreadlocks walking with his arm around her. This man would later be identified as Jesse Leroy Matthew Jr. At 1:08 a.m., the last known footage of Hannah Graham was recorded. It showed her walking with the man near the entrance to the Tempo Restaurant, a location not far from where she would ultimately vanish. This was the last known sighting of her alive. By Saturday morning, Hannah's friends began expressing concern over her absence. She had not returned to her apartment and was not responding to texts or calls. Her roommate formally reported her missing to the Charlottesville Police Department on Sunday, September 14th. The case quickly escalated due to the unusual circumstances and Hannah's well-established routines, which she had abruptly stopped following. As the search began, her disappearance drew national attention. A young woman vanishing in a busy, well-trafficked area like the downtown mall raised immediate alarms. Police began piecing together surveillance footage and eyewitness accounts to reconstruct her final known movements. The presence of the man seen with Hannah became a focal point of the investigation. This chapter marked the beginning of a community-wide search and a complex investigation that would ultimately connect Hannah's case to a larger pattern of violence involving other young women in Virginia. The disappearance of Hannah Graham prompted a swift and intense response from both law enforcement and the local community. By Monday, September 15, 2014, the Charlottesville Police Department held a press conference formally announcing that she was missing and solicited public assistance. Her family, who had traveled from Northern Virginia, spoke publicly, urging anyone with information to come forward. The university community mobilized quickly. Hundreds of students, staff, and volunteers joined search efforts, covering areas around the UVA campus and downtown Charlottesville. Flyers bearing Hannah's image were posted around the city, and social media campaigns under the hashtag #HelpFind Hannah spread widely. A $100,000 reward was offered for information leading to her safe return. Investigators released stills from surveillance footage showing Hannah's last known movements. The man seen walking beside her became the primary person of interest. On September 18th, police identified him as Jesse Leroy Matthew Jr., a 32-year-old employee of UVA's medical center and a former taxi driver familiar with the area. Authorities visited Matthew's apartment in Charlottesville and executed a search warrant. They also seized his vehicle, a burnt orange 1998 Chrysler Coupe, which was seen in surveillance footage. Although Matthew initially agreed to speak with police, he fled shortly after their initial contact on September 20th, leading authorities to issue a wanted poster for abduction with intent to defile. The search effort expanded dramatically. The FBI and Virginia State Police joined the investigation, and a wanted alert for Matthew was broadcast nationwide. Tips poured in, and authorities traced Matthew's movements along the East Coast. On September 24th, police located and arrested him in Galveston County, Texas, where he had been camping on the beach. Matthew waived extradition and was returned to Virginia. His arrest brought a new level of scrutiny to the investigation. Forensic evidence obtained from his car and apartment linked him to Hannah's disappearance. The Charlottesville police chief announced that they had probable cause to believe she was either injured or killed, though her body had not yet been found. As search teams combed wooded areas, abandoned buildings, and remote roads in and around Albemarle County, citizens continued to hold vigils, hoping for Hannah's return. The tension in the community was palpable, with many drawing connections between Hannah's disappearance and other unsolved cases involving young women in the region. While hope persisted, the case was rapidly transitioning from a missing person investigation to a potential homicide case. Forensic developments in Matthew's arrest would set the stage for deeper inquiries into his past, a past that law enforcement would soon find had troubling parallels with other violent crimes. Following Jesse Matthews' arrest, investigators began to delve into his background, revealing a troubling history. Matthew had a documented pattern of violent and predatory behavior, including accusations of sexual assault during his time at two Virginia colleges, Liberty University and Christopher Newport University. In both cases, he withdrew before disciplinary proceedings could conclude, and no charges were filed. Attention quickly turned to forensic evidence linking Matthew to a 2005 case in Fairfax, Virginia. In that incident, a 26-year-old woman was sexually assaulted in a parking lot after being dragged into a wooded area. She survived and provided a description of her attacker, leading to a rape kit being processed. The case remained unsolved for nearly a decade. In September 2014, shortly after Matthew's arrest for Hannah Graham's abduction, DNA evidence from the 2005 case was retested and matched his profile. This development prompted authorities to charge Matthew with attempted capital murder, abduction, and sexual assault in connection with the Fairfax case. As the investigation widened, a significant connection emerged. Forensic testing established a DNA link between Jesse Matthew and the 2009 disappearance and murder of Morgan Dana Harrington, a Virginia Tech student who vanished after attending a Metallica concert at John Paul Jones Arena in Charlottesville. Her remains were discovered months later on a remote farm in Albemarle County, the same county where Hannah Graham was last seen. Harrington's case had remained unsolved for years, despite widespread media attention, and a joint investigation by Virginia State Police and the FBI. In 2010, a DNA profile obtained from evidence in her case was found to match the 2005 Fairfax assault, but until Matthew's arrest, the identity of the suspect had been unknown. The revelation that one man could be responsible for 3 attacks over a span of nearly a decade prompted widespread outrage. It raised questions about systemic failures in how prior accusations against Matthew had been handled and whether earlier intervention could have prevented further harm. Meanwhile, Matthew remained in custody as prosecutors prepared charges. He was indicted by a grand jury in Fairfax County and held without bond. Law enforcement officials emphasized that the investigations into Graham and Harrington were ongoing, but now focused squarely on building murder cases against him. The confluence of evidence and DNA links painted a disturbing picture of a serial predator who had eluded justice for years. These connections turned the Hannah Graham investigation into a broader inquiry into unsolved crimes in Central Virginia, with investigators re-examining cold cases for possible ties to Jesse Matthew. As the public learned more about his past and the growing web of forensic evidence, the pressure on law enforcement to secure convictions intensified. Families of victims demanded justice, and prosecutors began preparing for what would become a series of high-profile trials. On October 18, 2014, more than a month after Hannah Graham was last seen, her remains were discovered by searchers in a heavily wooded area near Old Lynchburg Road in southern Albemarle County, Virginia. The location was approximately 12 miles from the downtown mall where she was last seen, and just a few miles from the site where Morgan Harrington's remains had been found in 2010. The skeletal remains were identified as Hannah's through dental records. The area was isolated and difficult to access, consistent with an effort to conceal a body. Investigators found clothing and personal items nearby that matched descriptions provided by her family. While the cause of death was officially listed as homicide, the extent of decomposition made it difficult to determine the exact manner of death. Forensic pathologists concluded that her death was the result of homicidal violence. Following the discovery, Jesse Matthew was indicted by an Albemarle County grand jury on charges of abduction with intent to defile, first-degree murder, and murder during the commission of an abduction. The charges reflected the evidence gathered from surveillance, forensic analysis, and Matthew's history. In parallel, he faced trial in Fairfax for the 2005 sexual assault. Prosecutors there aimed to secure a conviction that would keep Matthew incarcerated regardless of the outcome in the Graham case. His legal team initially argued against the DNA evidence, but the scientific certainty of the match left little room for dispute. Matthew was held at the Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Jail. Prosecutors sought the death penalty in the Graham case, citing aggravating circumstances including the abduction and sexual motive. Defense attorneys argued against it, citing mitigating factors in Matthew's background, including a history of mental illness and trauma. As the legal cases moved forward, the families of both Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington worked closely with authorities. They pushed for coordinated efforts to prosecute all relevant cases thoroughly, emphasizing justice over speed. The Commonwealth's Attorney's Office indicated that it was developing a comprehensive approach to try Matthew for both murders, relying on forensic evidence, timelines, and circumstantial links between the cases. In 2015, legal teams engaged in plea negotiations. A plea deal was viewed as a possible means to avoid protracted trials and spare the victims' families additional trauma. It was also seen as a way to ensure a life sentence without the uncertainty of a jury trial. While legal proceedings continued, public focus remained on the implications of the case. Institutions where Matthew had previously enrolled faced scrutiny over their handling of sexual misconduct allegations. National conversations about campus safety and background checks for university employees intensified. The discovery of Hannah Graham's remains marked a tragic milestone in the case, but also solidified the path toward accountability. With a suspect in custody and a growing body of evidence, the judicial system now faced the challenge of delivering justice while confronting broader systemic issues highlighted by the investigation. By early 2016, Jesse Matthew Jr. faced 3 major prosecutions: the abduction and murder of Hannah Graham, the murder of Morgan Harrington, and the 2005 Fairfax sexual assault. In Fairfax, Matthew had already entered an offered plea to charges of attempted capital murder and sexual assault, acknowledging the evidence against him without admitting guilt. He was sentenced to 3 life terms. As the trial dates for the Graham and Harrington cases approached, prosecutors and defense attorneys negotiated a resolution that would spare the victims' families prolonged and painful trials. On March 2, 2016, Matthew entered a guilty plea in Albemarle County Circuit Court to 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of abduction with intent to defile for the killings of both Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington. Under the terms of the plea agreement, Matthew received 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. In exchange, the Commonwealth withdrew the death penalty. Prosecutors explained the decision as a means to ensure permanent imprisonment, while preventing drawn-out appeals and further trauma to the families. In court, Matthew sat quietly as the Commonwealth's attorney read a detailed summary of evidence. The timeline placed him with both victims at key locations, and forensic evidence, DNA, hair samples, and fibers, connected him conclusively to the crimes. The judge asked Matthew if he understood the consequences of his plea. He replied, "Yes, sir." Family members of Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington addressed the court with emotional victim impact statements. John and Sue Graham spoke about the loss of their daughter, her intelligence, her joy for life, and the void her death left. Gil and Dan Harrington described the enduring pain of Morgan's murder and their efforts to ensure her memory lived on through advocacy work. Both families expressed support for the plea agreement, emphasizing the importance of finality and certainty in the case. They underscored that no sentence could reverse their loss, but that the resolution ensured Matthew would never harm anyone again. Outside the courtroom, public officials and advocates acknowledged the outcome as a just resolution. Law enforcement agencies involved in the years-long investigation praised the collaboration between local police, Virginia State Police, and the FBI. UVA officials reiterated their commitment to campus safety reforms, including background checks and support for survivors of sexual violence. With the legal proceedings concluded, Jesse Matthew was transferred to the Red Onion State Prison, a supermax facility in Wise County, Virginia, designated for the state's most dangerous inmates. There, he would serve out his life sentences in solitary confinement for much of each day. The conclusion of the trials brought a measure of closure to 2 of Virginia's most high-profile criminal cases. But they also left lingering questions about institutional accountability, missed warning signs, and what could have been done to prevent multiple tragedies. For the families of Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington, justice had been delivered, though the wounds left behind would remain. The resolution of the Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington cases marked the end of a long and painful journey for the victims' families, investigators, and the Charlottesville community. Yet, the aftermath spurred broader reflection on how institutions, law enforcement, and society address crimes of sexual violence and campus safety. In the wake of Hannah's death, the University of Virginia faced intense scrutiny. Matthew had been employed by the university's medical center, raising questions about hiring practices and employee screening. UVA reviewed and revised its background check procedures and implemented new safety initiatives, including improved lighting, emergency call boxes, and expanded late-night transportation services. Nationally, the case contributed to a growing dialogue about sexual assault on college campuses. Advocates cited Matthew's pattern of past behavior and the failure of multiple institutions to act decisively when he was accused of misconduct. His history at Liberty University and Christopher Newport University, where allegations of sexual assault went unpunished due to his voluntary withdrawals, highlighted systemic gaps in accountability. In response, lawmakers and educators called for better tracking of student conduct violations, improved interinstitutional communication, and stronger protections for victims. The case was referenced in policy discussions around Title IX reform, the Clary Act, and initiatives aimed at closing loopholes that allowed repeat offenders to avoid detection. Hannah's parents, John and Sue Graham, became vocal advocates for campus safety and victim support. They worked with other families, including the Harringtons, to push for legislative changes and speak out on behalf of other victims. Sue Graham served on panels addressing sexual assault policy, while Gil Harrington helped launch Help Save the Next Girl, a nonprofit dedicated to youth safety and education. Memorials for Hannah and Morgan were erected in Charlottesville and on their respective campuses. At UVA, students organized vigils and created scholarship funds in Hannah's name. Morgan Harrington was honored through the establishment of a community service initiative and the Morgan Dana Harrington Memorial Scholarship. Investigators revisited unsolved cases across Virginia and the Mid-Atlantic, reviewing cold case files for potential links to Matthew. Though no additional charges were brought, his conviction offered resolution in 3 significant crimes and spurred renewed efforts in victim advocacy and forensic investigations. Media coverage of the case remained extensive for years, with documentaries and news features examining the failures that allowed a serial offender to operate undetected. True crime programs detailed the investigation, and journalists highlighted the role of surveillance footage, forensic science, and public involvement in solving the case. While justice had been served in the courts, the emotional scars for the families and community remained. Yet, through public service, advocacy, and remembrance, both the Graham and Harrington families ensured that their daughters' legacies would not be defined by violence, but by the positive change inspired in their names. Reva Rebecca Steenkamp was born on August 19, 1983, in Cape Town, South Africa. Raised in a modest and close-knit family, she was the daughter of June and Barry Steenkamp. Her father worked as a horse trainer, and her upbringing included both discipline and warmth, elements that shaped her personality and professional path. The family later moved to Port Elizabeth in the Eastern Cape, where Reva spent most of her formative years. From a young age, Reva showed a strong inclination toward academic and artistic achievement. After finishing high school, She enrolled at Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University. There, she studied law and graduated with a Bachelor of Laws degree, demonstrating academic diligence and ambition. She had aspirations of being admitted to the bar and becoming a qualified legal advocate. In parallel with her academic pursuits, Steenkamp embarked on a successful modeling career. She became known for her work in television, commercials, and fashion campaigns, recognized not only for her beauty, but also for her articulate and professional demeanor. Her modeling credentials included work for major South African brands, such as Avon and Toyota. She also gained broader recognition as a presenter for Fashion TV South Africa. Riva's public image combined intelligence and poise. In 2011, she was named the first face of Avon Cosmetics in South Africa. In 2013, shortly before her death, she participated in the reality TV show Tropica Island of Treasure, filmed in Jamaica. The program aired posthumously, increasing public interest in her life and character. Friends and colleagues described her as grounded and compassionate. She was involved in causes against gender-based violence and was planning to speak at a school event on the morning of her death. Valentine's Day, 2013. About domestic abuse and self-respect. Those close to her often highlighted her kindness, optimism, and commitment to using her visibility for positive change. Although Riva lived a largely public life, she was also described as private and introspective. She reportedly maintained close ties with her family, particularly her mother. In interviews and public appearances, she often emphasized the importance of education, personal integrity, and independence. Her life was marked by a balance between high-profile modeling and serious legal aspirations. At the time of her death, she was seen as a rising star in South African media, admired for both her intellect and her charm. The news of her killing stunned the country and reverberated internationally, not just because of her fame, but because of the values she had come to represent. Her tragic death would spark a protracted legal battle, intense public scrutiny, and ongoing discussions around violence against women in South Africa. Oscar Leonard Carl Pistorius was born on November 22, 1986, in Sandton, Johannesburg, South Africa. Born with fibular hemimelia, a congenital absence of the fibula in both legs. His condition led to the amputation of both lower legs below the knee when he was 11 months old. Despite his disability, Pistorius's upbringing emphasized resilience and participation in sport. He attended Pretoria Boys High School, where he was active in rugby, water polo, and tennis, before turning to athletics following a knee injury. In 2004, Pistorius gained international attention at the Paralympic Games in Athens, where he won gold in the 200-meter sprint. He ran using J-shaped carbon fiber prosthetic blades known as flex-foot cheetahs, earning him the nickname Blade Runner. His achievements challenged global perceptions of disability and athleticism. Pistorius's ambition extended beyond Paralympic competition. He sought to compete against able-bodied athletes in the Olympic Games. His efforts led to a legal and scientific debate over whether his prosthetics gave him an unfair advantage. Initially banned by the IAAF in 2007, the decision was overturned in 2008 by the Court of Arbitration for Sport, though he missed qualifying for the 2008 Beijing Olympics. He continued training intensively. In 2012, Pistorius made history by becoming the first double amputee to compete in the Olympic Games. At the London Olympics, he ran in the 400 meters and the 4x 400 meter relay, advancing to the semifinals in the individual event. His presence at the Olympics was hailed as a landmark achievement and widely covered by the global media. Off the track, Pistorius maintained a high public profile, endorsed by major brands including Nike and Oakley. He was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in 2012. His autobiography and numerous public appearances portrayed him as determined, articulate, and charitable. However, aspects of his private life also drew attention. Reports and testimonies later described Pistorius as sometimes volatile, with a passion for firearms and a quick temper. Several prior incidents involving accusations of aggressive behavior were noted by the media after his arrest. Nonetheless, before the events of 2013, he was largely seen as a national hero and symbol of perseverance. By early 2013, Pistorius was living in a secure estate in Pretoria and was in a relationship with Riva Steenkamp. They had been dating for a few months. Publicly, the relationship appeared glamorous, often highlighted in tabloids and social media. Privately, as would later be detailed in court, the dynamics were more complex. Pistorius's life, marked by triumph over adversity and celebrated athletic feats, would take a dramatic turn with the shooting of Riva Steenkamp. The man once known for breaking barriers would soon face charges of murder, setting off one of the most closely watched trials in South African history. Riva Steenkamp and Oscar Pistorius began dating in November 2012. Their relationship, though brief, quickly captured national attention. Pistorius, an international sports icon, and Steenkamp, a rising media figure and model, formed what the South African press described as a power couple. Public appearances, red carpet events, and affectionate social media posts painted a picture of romance and mutual admiration. The couple attended numerous high-profile functions together, including the South African Sports Awards in November 2012. They shared photos and messages on Twitter, often praising one another and expressing gratitude. Steenkamp posted regularly about love, self-respect, and trust, comments that later gained retrospective attention. Pistorius also shared images and messages referring to Riva with affection and admiration. Despite the public image, internal dynamics appeared more complex. During the later court proceedings, text messages exchanged between the two revealed tension. In one message dated January 2013, Steenkamp wrote, "I'm scared of you sometimes, and how you snap at me, and how you will act towards me." Other messages reflected ordinary disagreements, but occasionally pointed to deeper issues, including feelings of control and insecurity. Friends of Steenkamp stated in media interviews that while she was fond of Pistorius, there were concerns about his temper and possessiveness. According to some accounts, she had confided doubts about the future of their relationship. However, there was no formal complaint or public evidence of domestic abuse during their time together. Their relationship lasted just over 3 months. The couple had plans for Valentine's Day 2013. Steenkamp was reportedly preparing to speak to students at a Johannesburg school on the subject of gender violence and personal empowerment. On February 13th, she spent the day shopping and communicating with friends. That evening, she returned to Pistorius's home in the Silverwoods Country Estate in Pretoria. Security footage later confirmed her arrival at the estate shortly after 6 p.m. According to Pistorius, they had dinner together, and she spent the night. Just hours later, Steenkamp would be fatally shot. The brief relationship, initially celebrated for its glamour, would soon be examined under intense judicial and media scrutiny. Investigators and prosecutors would analyze every message, public photo, and witness account to piece together the true nature of their time together. Riva Steenkamp's friends and family later emphasized her independence and strength, suggesting that she was considering ending the relationship. Whether this played a role in the events of February 14th remains part of the broader legal context rather than an established fact. The public fascination with the couple, once rooted in admiration, transformed into a deep inquiry into personal conflict, control, and tragedy. On the evening of February 13th, 2013, Riva Steenkamp arrived at Oscar Pistorius's residence in the Silverwoods Country Estate in Pretoria. The estate was a gated community with private security, offering a sense of safety and seclusion. Steenkamp had spent the day running errands, including shopping for a Valentine's Day gift. She had intended to attend a school event the following morning to speak about domestic abuse and empowerment. That night, according to Pistorius's later testimony, the couple had dinner at home and retired early. He stated that they went to bed between 9 and 10 p.m. The exact sequence of events from that point remains central to the trial and investigation. Neighbors would later testify to hearing what sounded like an argument around 1 a.m., although the defense disputed this. Around 3 a.m. on February 14th, Pistorius fired 4 shots through the locked door of his ensuite bathroom. Steenkamp, who had entered the bathroom and locked the door, was struck by 3 of the bullets, in the head, arm, and hip. Pistorius called estate security and paramedics soon afterward. He claimed to have mistaken Steenkamp for an intruder. A security guard who responded to the call testified that Pistorius appeared visibly distressed. Phone records confirmed that Pistorius made calls to emergency services and to his friend Justin Diveris shortly after the shooting. Paramedics arrived to find Steenkamp with no signs of life. She was declared dead at the scene. Pistorius's account, given in his initial affidavit, stated that he had woken up in the middle of the night, heard a noise in the bathroom, and, fearing an intruder, retrieved his 9mm pistol from under the bed. He said he fired through the door in a state of fear, and then broke down the door with a cricket bat when he realized Riva was not in bed. The prosecution later argued that the sequence indicated a deliberate act following an argument. Ballistic experts established that Pistorius fired from a low position, potentially on his stumps. The shots were directed toward the lower half of the bathroom door. Forensic photos and scene reconstructions later shown in court illustrated the layout of the bathroom, the bullet holes, and blood traces at the scene. Police investigators found Steenkamp's cell phone, an overnight bag, and a pair of flip-flops in the bedroom, indicating she was staying the night. There were also signs that she may have been using the toilet at the time of the shooting. No defensive injuries or evidence of physical assault were reported in the autopsy, but the gunshots were fatal. Pistorius was arrested at the scene and taken into custody. He did not flee or resist arrest. His demeanor was described as distraught. The case immediately drew national and international media attention. Initial reports speculated about a Valentine's Day surprise gone wrong, but suspicions quickly mounted. The early hours of February 14th, meant for expressions of love, instead marked the violent death of a rising public figure and the beginning of a criminal case that would shake South Africa. Oscar Pistorius was arrested on the morning of February 14th, 2013, shortly after the fatal shooting of Riva Steenkamp. He was taken into custody by police from the Bosch Cop station in Pretoria. News of the arrest spread rapidly, drawing immediate attention from South African and international media. Early headlines reflected confusion over the motive and circumstances, but the charge of murder was soon confirmed. Lieutenant Colonel Katlego Mogale of the South African Police Service initially briefed the press, confirming that a woman had been fatally shot at a residence in the Silverwoods estate and that a 26-year-old man had been taken into custody. Pistorius, though not named initially, was soon publicly identified. By mid-morning, police spokesperson Denise Bukes confirmed that Pistorius had been charged with murder and would appear in court the following day. Authorities stated there had been prior complaints of domestic disturbances at the Pistorius residence. This claim, denied by Pistorius's family and legal team, added fuel to speculation regarding the nature of his relationship with Steenkamp. Police recovered a 9mm pistol at the scene. No sign of forced entry was found. On February 15th, Pistorius made his first appearance in the Pretoria Magistrates' Court. He appeared emotional, reportedly weeping during the session. The hearing was brief and focused on the formal registration of the charge. Prosecutors indicated their intent to pursue a premeditated murder charge, one of the most serious categories under South African law, carrying a potential life sentence. The state's assertion of premeditation implied that Pistorius had formed intent to kill before firing. Prosecutor Gary Nell emphasized that Steenkamp had locked herself in the bathroom, and that Pistorius had time to consider his actions before shooting through the door. The defense, led by advocate Barry Rue, immediately countered that there was no basis for a murder charge, calling it a tragic accident. Public reaction was swift and divided. Some expressed disbelief that Pistorius, a celebrated Paralympian and national hero, could be capable of such violence. Others pointed to earlier incidents involving aggression and his known affinity for firearms. Social media, talk shows, and news outlets debated the possible motives, evidence, and legal implications. Pistorius's family issued a statement declaring his innocence and expressing sympathy for the Steenkamp family. His management team canceled all public appearances and commercial engagements. Brands including Nike and Oakley suspended sponsorships pending legal outcomes. As public pressure grew, the National Prosecuting Authority committed to a thorough and transparent legal process. Forensics teams continued analyzing ballistic evidence, phone records, and door damage. Reva Steenkamp's autopsy confirmed 3 bullet wounds and no defensive injuries, deepening questions around the shooting's circumstances. In the days that followed, Pistorius remained in police custody, held at the Brooklyn Police Station. Legal arguments over bail began to take shape, with both sides preparing for an extensive and contested hearing. South Africa, still grappling with high rates of violence against women, watched closely. The initial phase of the investigation had transformed the national sports figure into a murder suspect and turned a private tragedy into a high-profile criminal case. Oscar Pistorius's bail hearing began on February 19, 2013. At the Pretoria Magistrates' Court. The proceedings drew extensive media coverage, with reporters and spectators lining up hours before each session. The hearing lasted 4 days and featured detailed arguments from both prosecution and defense. At its core were questions about Pistorius's version of events and whether he posed a flight risk or threat to the public. Magistrate Desmond Nair presided over the hearing. Prosecutor Jerry Nell asserted that Pistorius had committed premeditated murder, arguing that he armed himself, walked toward the bathroom, and fired 4 shots through a closed door. Nell emphasized that Reva Steenkamp had nowhere to hide and could not have been mistaken for an intruder. The prosecution painted a picture of calculated action. Nell questioned Pistorius's credibility, stating that he had constructed a version that cannot hold water. He also noted that Pistorius had previous incidents involving firearms, including discharging a gun in a restaurant and carrying a weapon into public spaces, suggesting impulsivity and a disregard for safety. Defense advocate Barry Rue responded by asserting that Pistorius had no intention of killing Steenkamp, and that the shooting was a tragic accident. Rue argued that Pistorius had acted out of fear, believing a burglar had entered through the bathroom window. He described Pistorius as emotionally devastated, fully cooperative with police, and unlikely to flee due to his public profile and physical limitations. On February 20th, Pistorius read a detailed affidavit to the court. In it, he described waking during the night, hearing a noise, and assuming Steenkamp was still in bed. He claimed to have fired without warning through the locked door, only realizing she was not in bed after the shots. He said he then broke down the door and tried to render aid, calling for emergency services. Throughout the hearing, Pistorius was visibly distressed. He cried openly and at one point retched in court. The media reported extensively on his demeanor, noting the emotional weight of the proceedings. Public opinion was sharply divided. Some viewed the display as sincere, while others perceived it as tactical. On February 22nd, Magistrate Nair delivered the ruling. He acknowledged that Pistorius had presented a plausible version and was not a proven flight risk. He granted bail set at $1 million, approximately $110,000 USD at the time, including strict conditions. Pistorius had to surrender his passports, report regularly to police, refrain from using firearms, and remain in Pretoria unless granted court permission to travel. The court's decision drew mixed reactions. Supporters of Pistorius expressed relief, while critics questioned whether an average citizen would have received similar treatment. The ruling intensified debates in South Africa about celebrity justice, gender violence, and the balance between public interest and legal process. Steenkamp's family did not attend the hearing. Through their lawyer, they conveyed that they were focused on mourning and preparing for Riva's funeral. On the same day Pistorius was granted bail, her memorial service was held in Port Elizabeth. Her parents, June and Barry Steenkamp, spoke briefly to the media, expressing devastation and a desire for truth and justice. The bail hearing concluded the first legal chapter in a case that was far from over. The state and defense began preparing for trial, gathering witnesses, expert reports, and digital evidence. The next phase would be a courtroom drama that captivated South Africa and the world. The trial of Oscar Pistorius commenced on March 3, 2014, at the High Court in Pretoria. Presiding Judge Thokozile Masipa, a former journalist turned jurist, was assigned to the case. The trial was broadcast live across South Africa, making it one of the most closely followed criminal proceedings in the country's history. The state was represented by seasoned prosecutor Jerry Nell. The defense team, led by advocate Barry Rue, had prepared an extensive challenge to the murder charge. Pistorius faced 4 charges: premeditated murder, 2 counts of reckless firearm use, and illegal possession of ammunition. He pleaded not guilty to all counts, maintaining he had mistaken Riva Steenkamp for an intruder. The prosecution opened with testimony from Michelle Berger, a neighbor who described waking to a woman's terrified screams, followed by gunshots. Her husband corroborated her account. Both testified that the screaming occurred before the shots, suggesting an argument. The defense challenged their recollection, arguing that the sounds were misinterpreted and distorted by distance and acoustics. Ballistics expert Captain Chris Mangena testified that the trajectory of the bullets indicated Pistorius had fired from a low angle, consistent with being on his stumps. Forensic analysis confirmed that 3 of the bullets had struck Steenkamp through the door, causing fatal injuries. A police photo reconstruction displayed the bathroom's layout and the bullet holes in the door. Another key witness was radiologist Johann Stipp, who lived nearby and arrived at the scene minutes after the shooting. He described finding Pistorius in a distressed state, attempting to resuscitate Steenkamp. Stipp stated that Pistorius repeatedly said, "I thought she was a burglar. I shot her." His testimony supported both the defense claim of remorse and the prosecution's assertion that Pistorius was aware of his actions. In April, Pistorius took the stand. He testified for several days, describing the events of February 14th in emotional detail. He claimed to have felt vulnerable due to his disability, and said he feared intruders. He wept during questioning, and at times appeared unable to speak. Prosecutor Nell pressed him on inconsistencies, accusing him of tailoring his version and dodging responsibility. Under cross-examination, Nell repeatedly challenged Pistorius's recollection and intentions. He questioned why Pistorius had not confirmed Steenkamp's location before shooting, and why he had not used other security measures, such as pressing a panic button. The prosecution suggested that Pistorius was angry after an argument and fired in rage. The defense introduced phone records and text messages, including the one in which Steenkamp expressed fear over Pistorius's temper. However, Rue emphasized other messages that showed affection and normal romantic communication. He argued that no one could prove a motive for murder beyond reasonable doubt. The trial adjourned several times for witness scheduling and legal arguments. Over the months, more than 30 witnesses testified. Experts debated sound patterns, gunshot echoes, and psychological profiles. The defense called a psychologist, Dr. Merrill Vorster, who testified that Pistorius had generalized anxiety disorder, possibly influencing his reaction. The state challenged this claim and presented rebuttal expert Professor Jonathan Schultz. The psychological evaluation became a contentious point, as the court had ordered Pistorius to undergo a 30-day mental health assessment. The panel concluded he was mentally fit and criminally responsible at the time of the shooting. By August 2014, the trial drew to a close. Both sides submitted lengthy final arguments. Judge Masipa announced she would deliver the verdict in September. The world awaited the ruling in a case that had evolved into a broader discussion on justice, celebrity, and accountability. On September 11, 2014, Judge Thokozile Masipa began delivering her verdict in the trial of Oscar Pistorius. The reading spanned 2 days and was closely followed by millions worldwide. The court, broadcast live, became a focal point for South Africa's legal system and its handling of high-profile crime. Masipa began by reviewing the evidence. She rejected the state's assertion of premeditated murder, finding that the prosecution had not proven intent beyond reasonable doubt. While noting Pistorius's inconsistencies and errors in judgment, she concluded they did not prove he deliberately intended to kill Reva Steenkamp. The theory of an intentional argument escalating into violence was not conclusively established by witness or forensic evidence. However, Masipa also dismissed the defense's version entirely. She stated that a reasonable person in Pistorius's position would have foreseen that firing into a closed door could result in death. On this basis, she found him guilty of culpable homicide, South Africa's equivalent of negligent killing. The court also found him guilty on one firearm-related charge: negligent discharge of a firearm at Tasha's restaurant in Johannesburg in January 2013. He was acquitted of the charge of illegal ammunition, possession, and of a second firearm incident. The verdict sparked widespread controversy. Many legal experts, women's rights groups, and members of the public criticized the ruling, arguing that Pistorius's actions showed clear intent, or at least gross recklessness amounting to murder. The National Prosecuting Authority, NPA, announced plans to appeal the verdict. On October 21, 2014, sentencing was handed down. Masipa sentenced Pistorius to 5 years in prison for culpable homicide and an additional 3-year suspended sentence for the firearm charge. She ruled that he would be eligible for parole under correctional supervision after serving 1/6 of the sentence, around 10 months. Pistorius was taken to Gosi Mampuru prison in Pretoria. He was held in the hospital wing due to his disability and public profile. While in prison, reports emerged of him attending Bible study sessions and experiencing emotional difficulty adapting to incarceration. Meanwhile, the prosecution proceeded with its appeal. In November 2015, the South African Supreme Court of Appeal overturned Masipa's verdict. The panel ruled unanimously that Pistorius should have foreseen that his actions would likely result in death. The court found him guilty of murder under the doctrine of dolus eventualis, where a person foresees the outcome of their actions and reconciles with it. The case returned to Judge Masipa for resentencing. On July 6, 2016, she sentenced Pistorius to 6 years in prison, citing mitigating circumstances including his remorse and rehabilitation prospects. Once again, public reaction was sharply divided, with critics calling the sentence lenient. The NPA appealed once more. On November 24, 2017, the Supreme Court of Appeal increased the sentence to 13 years and 5 months, aligning with the minimum prescribed sentence for murder. The court ruled that the original sentence was shockingly lenient and did not reflect the seriousness of the crime. Pistorius remained incarcerated, serving his term at Atteridgeville Correctional Center near Pretoria. He became eligible for parole in 2023, subject to hearings and victim impact submissions. Legal proceedings spanning nearly 5 years had redefined his public image and raised enduring questions about violence, accountability, and justice in South Africa. Riva Steenkamp's death left an enduring impact on her family, particularly her parents, June and Barry Steenkamp. In the years following the tragedy, they became public figures in their own right, speaking out against gender-based violence and sharing Riva's story to raise awareness. Their grief was magnified by the intense media attention and prolonged court process. The Steenkamps attended several key trial sessions, often sitting quietly in the courtroom. June Steenkamp, in particular, became a steady presence, sometimes visibly emotional but composed. She described the experience of seeing the man who killed her daughter as unbearable, yet expressed a desire to understand what had truly happened. In media interviews and her memoir, Riva, A Mother's Story, June offered a portrait of Riva's life beyond the headlines. She described her daughter as vibrant, driven, and kind, someone who worked hard, cared for others, and stood up for justice. The book detailed Riva's early life, her modeling career, and the devastating aftermath of her death. It also criticized the judicial handling of the case, particularly the original verdict and sentence. Barry Steenkamp, Riva's father, suffered health issues in the years following her death, but remained vocal. He described Riva as the most beautiful person inside and out. In statements to the press and at memorial events, he emphasized forgiveness while still demanding accountability. He said he wanted to meet Pistorius one day to hear the truth face to face. The family established the Riva Rebecca Steenkamp Foundation to honor her memory and advocate against violence toward women. The foundation focused on legal reform, public education, and support for survivors of abuse. Its mission aligned with Riva's own intentions. She had planned to speak at a school about domestic violence the very morning she was killed. June Steenkamp became a public advocate, speaking at forums, schools, and conferences. She participated in awareness campaigns and engaged with lawmakers on improving protections for women. She stated that turning her personal loss into public service gave meaning to Riva's legacy. Riva's friends and former colleagues also contributed to memorial efforts. They shared stories of her generosity and ambition. The airing of Tropica Island of Treasure, which Riva had filmed shortly before her death, included a tribute. Viewers described the posthumous broadcast as deeply moving. Her final scenes showed her talking about living with purpose and love. In 2023, as Pistorius's parole review approached, the Steen camps were again thrust into the spotlight. South African law required victims' families to be consulted during the parole process. June submitted an impact statement, reaffirming the enduring pain of losing Riva. Barry, in declining health, participated through the family's legal representative. Pistorius eventually met Barry in a victim offender dialogue session arranged by correctional services. Details of the meeting were kept private, but Barry later said he hoped Pistorius had told the truth. The parole board's initial ruling denied Pistorius's release, stating he had not served the required portion of his sentence. Riva Steenkamp's death became emblematic of South Africa's struggles with gender-based violence. Her name was invoked during national campaigns, protest marches, and vigils. Advocates argued that her case highlighted the need for systemic change in how abuse and violence against women were addressed. Her family continued to push for Riva's story to be a catalyst for action, not just remembrance. The case of Oscar Pistorius and the killing of Riva Steenkamp left a deep mark on South African society and international public consciousness. Beyond the personal tragedy, the trial became a symbol of broader issues: violence against women, the role of celebrity in justice, and the treatment of disability in law. South Africa, already grappling with high rates of gender-based violence, was forced to confront difficult questions. Activists pointed to Riva's killing as emblematic of a wider crisis, where women are too often harmed or killed by intimate partners. Her death spurred calls for stronger legal protections, improved police response, and social education on gender inequality. Pistorius's trial highlighted perceived disparities in the legal system. Critics argued that his fame and resources afforded him privileges many accused persons do not receive, such as expert witnesses, private evaluations, and extensive legal support. Supporters, however, claimed the scrutiny ensured he was treated more harshly, not more leniently. The court process also raised complex questions about the interpretation of intent and negligence in criminal law. The shift from culpable homicide to murder under dolus eventualis became a legal landmark in South African jurisprudence. It clarified how courts evaluate foreseen consequences, even without direct intention to kill. In correctional terms, Pistorius served part of his sentence at Kosi Mampuru Prison, and later at Atteridgeville Correctional Center, where he reportedly lived under protective conditions due to his status. He completed work programs and underwent therapy, and reports indicated he led a quiet life behind bars. His parole was reviewed in 2023 and initially denied, then reconsidered under revised calculations of sentence length. On November 24, 2023, Oscar Pistorius was granted parole effective from January 5, 2024. The Department of Correctional Services confirmed the decision, stating it was in accordance with South African law, which mandates parole eligibility after serving half the sentence for certain categories of crime. Conditions of release included monitoring and restrictions. The decision reignited public debate. While some accepted that the justice process had run its course, others, including gender rights groups, expressed concern that early release undermined the seriousness of the crime. June Steenkamp issued a statement emphasizing her continued grief and respect for the legal decision, though she reiterated the importance of never forgetting what had happened to her daughter. Pistorius has remained largely out of public view since his release. He has not returned to professional sport and has not given public interviews. Legal experts say any future public engagements would likely be scrutinized through the lens of his conviction and its aftermath. Meanwhile, Reva Steenkamp's name continues to be invoked in campaigns against intimate partner violence. The Reva Rebecca Steenkamp Foundation remains active in promoting awareness, offering education programs, and supporting legal reforms. Her story is part of national curricula and advocacy programs aimed at educating young people about respect, empathy, and nonviolence. In the end, the legacy of the case is multifaceted: a bright life lost, a fallen hero, a family's enduring sorrow, and a nation's ongoing struggle with justice and equality. It remains one of the most widely discussed criminal cases in South African history, a reminder of the human cost behind headlines and the importance of truth, accountability, and reform. On May 26, 2005, Natalie Holloway, an 18-year-old honors student from Mountain Brook, Alabama, arrived in Aruba for a 5-day unofficial graduation trip with 124 classmates from Mountain Brook High School. The group was accompanied by 7 adult chaperones. They checked into the Holiday Inn Resort near the northern end of the island. The trip was organized to celebrate the students' high school graduation. According to teacher and chaperone Bob Plummer, the chaperones met with the students each day to ensure everything was fine. However, Jody Behrman, who organized the trip, stated the chaperones were not supposed to keep up with their every move. During their stay, the students engaged in various activities, including snorkeling, shopping, and enjoying the island's nightlife. One of the popular venues was Carlos and Charlie's, a nightclub in Oranjestad, where many tourists and locals gathered. Natalie was known for her academic achievements and was set to attend the University of Alabama on a full scholarship in the fall. She was described by friends as outgoing, responsible, and excited about her future. The trip proceeded without incident for the first few days, with students enjoying the island's attractions and social scene. However, the events of the final night would change the course of many lives. On the evening of May 29, 2005, Natalie Holloway and her classmates spent their final night in Aruba at Carlos and Charlie's, a popular nightclub in Oranjestad. The venue was known for its lively atmosphere and was a frequent spot for tourists. That night, Natalie was seen socializing and dancing with Joran van der Sloot, a 17-year-old Dutch honors student living in Aruba, and his friends, Deepak and Satish Kalpo. Around 1:30 a.m. on May 30th, Natalie was observed leaving the nightclub with van der Sloot and the Kalpo brothers. They departed in a gray Honda Civic, driven by Deepak Kalpo. This was the last time Natalie was seen by her friends. Later that morning, Natalie failed to appear for her scheduled flight home. Her packed luggage and passport were found in her hotel room, but there was no sign of her. The disappearance prompted immediate concern and initiated a search effort across the island. On the morning of May 30th, 2005, Natalie Holloway failed to appear for her scheduled flight home from Aruba. Her packed luggage and passport were found in her hotel room, but there was no sign of her. This prompted immediate concern among her classmates and chaperones. Upon learning of her daughter's disappearance, Beth Holloway and her husband, George Jug Twitty, flew to Aruba with friends on a private jet. Within hours of landing, they provided Aruban police with the name and address of Joran van der Sloot, the person last seen with Natalie. This information was obtained from the night manager at the Holiday Inn, who recognized van der Sloot on a videotape. The Twitties, accompanied by 2 Aruban police officers, went to the van der Sloot residence to look for Natalie. Van der Sloot initially denied knowing her, but later claimed, corroborated by Deepak Kalpoe, that they had taken Natalie to see sharks at the California lighthouse area of Arashi Beach, and then dropped her off at her hotel around 2 a.m. He stated that Natalie fell while exiting the car, but refused his help, and was approached by a man in a black shirt resembling a security guard's uniform as they drove away. The search for Natalie began immediately, involving hundreds of volunteers from Aruba and the United States. The Aruban government gave thousands of civil servants the day off to assist in the search efforts. 50 Dutch Marines conducted extensive shoreline searches, and 3 Dutch F-16 aircraft equipped with infrared sensors scanned the island for any signs of freshly dug graves. Despite these efforts, no trace of Natalie was found. Reports indicated that she did not appear on any nighttime security camera footage of the Holiday Inn lobby. However, there were conflicting statements about whether the hotel's security cameras were operational that night. Beth Holloway stated in April 2006 that the cameras were not functioning, but she made other statements indicating they were working, as noted in her book. Police Commissioner John van der Straten, the initial head of the investigation, mentioned that Natalie did not have to go through the lobby to return to her room. In the days following Natalie Holloway's disappearance, Aruban authorities focused their investigation on 3 individuals: Joran van der Sloot, a 17-year-old Dutch honors student, and brothers Deepak and Sadish Kalpoe, aged 21 and 18 respectively. The trio had been the last to see Natalie on the night of May 29, 2005, when she left the Carlos and Charlie's nightclub in their company. On June 9, 2005, van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. During initial interrogations, all 3 suspects claimed they had taken Natalie to the California lighthouse area to see sharks, and then dropped her off at her hotel around 2 a.m. However, inconsistencies in their statements soon emerged. As the investigation progressed, authorities detained 2 former security guards from a nearby hotel on June 5th, based on information provided by the initial suspects. These guards were released on June 13th without charges. Further complicating matters, the suspects' accounts of the night's events continued to change. At one point, they claimed to have left Natalie on the beach near the Marriott Hotel. On June 17th, a 4th individual, Steve Gregory Crows, a local disc jockey, was arrested after being implicated by the 3 main suspects. He was released on June 26th. Additionally, Paulus van der Sloot, Joran's father, was detained for questioning on June 22nd and released on June 26th. Despite multiple arrests and extensive interrogations, no charges were filed against any of the suspects due to insufficient evidence. The Kalpoe brothers were released on July 4th, while Joran van der Sloot remained in custody for an additional 60 days. In the wake of Natalie Holloway's disappearance, an extensive search operation was launched across Aruba. Hundreds of volunteers from both Aruba and the United States participated in the efforts. The Aruban government granted thousands of civil servants time off to assist in the search. 50 Dutch Marines conducted shoreline searches, and 3 Dutch F-16 aircraft equipped with infrared sensors scanned the island for any signs of freshly dug graves. Despite these efforts, no trace of Natalie was found. Reports indicated that she did not appear on any nighttime security camera footage of the Holiday Inn lobby. However, there were conflicting statements about whether the hotel's security cameras were operational that night. Beth Holloway stated in April 2006 that the cameras were not functioning, but she made other statements indicating they were working, as noted in her book. Police Commissioner Jan van der Straten, the initial head of the investigation, mentioned that Natalie did not have to go through the lobby to return to her room. The case attracted significant media attention in the United States, leading to widespread coverage and public interest. This intense media focus brought both support and criticism, highlighting issues related to media coverage of missing persons cases. In the months following Natalie Holloway's disappearance, the investigation faced numerous challenges, including conflicting statements from suspects and a lack of concrete evidence. On June 9, 2005, Joran van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. During interrogations, their accounts of the night's events varied. Initially, they claimed to have dropped Natalie off at her hotel. Later, they stated they left her on the beach near the Marriott Hotel. Van der Sloot also suggested that he was dropped off at home, leaving Natalie with the Kalpoe brothers. These inconsistencies complicated the investigation. On June 17, 2005, Steve Gregory Crows, a local disc jockey, was arrested after being implicated by the main suspects. He was released on June 26 due to lack of evidence. Similarly, Paulus van der Sloot, Joran's father, was detained on June 22 and released on June 26. Despite multiple arrests and extensive interrogations, no charges were filed against any of the suspects due to insufficient evidence. The Kalpoe brothers were released on July 4th, while Joran van der Sloot remained in custody for an additional 60 days. In November 2007, van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers were rearrested on suspicion of involvement in Natalie's death. However, they were released in December 2007, and the case was officially closed due to lack of evidence. Despite exhaustive search efforts and multiple arrests, the disappearance of Natalie Holloway remained unsolved. The Aruban authorities, along with international agencies, faced mounting challenges due to conflicting testimonies and a lack of concrete evidence. In July 2005, the Royal Netherlands Air Force deployed 3 F-16 aircraft equipped with infrared sensors to assist in the search. But no new leads were discovered. Subsequent efforts included draining a pond near the Aruba Racquet Club and searching a landfill based on witness statements. Yet these searches yielded no results. The case attracted significant media attention in the United States, leading to widespread coverage and public interest. This intense media focus brought both support and criticism, highlighting issues related to media coverage of missing persons cases. In 2006, the Aruban authorities collaborated with the FBI, providing documents and interviews with suspects. Despite these efforts, no substantial progress was made. The investigation faced further complications due to the expiration of Aruba's 12-year statute of limitations for prosecuting certain crimes. By 2012, Natalie Holloway was declared legally dead, and the case remained one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries. The lack of closure continued to impact her family and the broader public, keeping the case in the national consciousness. In early 2008, Dutch investigative journalist Peter R. de Vries initiated an undercover operation to shed light on the disappearance of Natalie Holloway. Collaborating with Patrick van der Eem, who befriended Joran van der Sloot, they secretly recorded conversations between the two. In these recordings, van der Sloot claimed that Holloway suffered a seizure during a sexual encounter on the beach and died. He alleged that, with the help of a friend named Dory, they disposed of her body at sea. The footage aired on Dutch television on February 3, 2008, attracting significant attention. Despite the confession, van der Sloot later retracted his statements, asserting he fabricated the story to impress van der Eem, whom he believed was involved in drug trafficking. Aruban authorities deemed the video admissible but insufficient for prosecution. Later that year, van der Sloot appeared on Fox News, claiming he sold Holloway into a sex trafficking ring for $10,000, providing a recording of a conversation with his father discussing the crime. However, the authenticity of the recording was disputed, and van der Sloot retracted his statements shortly after the interview. In 2010, van der Sloot was arrested in Peru for the murder of Stephanie Flores. During his incarceration, he made further conflicting statements about Holloway's disappearance, none of which led to conclusive evidence or charges. On May 30, 2010, exactly 5 years after Natalee Holloway's disappearance, Joran van der Sloot was implicated in another tragic incident. He was arrested in Chile on June 3, 2010, for the murder of 21-year-old Stephanie Flores in Lima, Peru. Flores was found dead in a hotel room registered to van der Sloot. Surveillance footage showed the two entering the room together, and van der Sloot leaving alone hours later. An autopsy revealed that Flores had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, leading to her death. During interrogation, van der Sloot confessed to the murder, stating that he killed Flores in a fit of rage after she discovered information on his laptop linking him to Holloway's case. He later attempted to retract his confession, claiming coercion, but a Peruvian judge ruled the confession valid. On January 13, 2012, van der Sloot was sentenced to 28 years in prison for Flores's murder. Concurrent with these events, van der Sloot was involved in an FBI sting operation. In March 2010, he contacted Beth Holloway's attorney, offering to reveal the location of Natalee's remains for $250,000. The FBI provided $25,000 as part of the operation. Van der Sloot accepted the money, but provided false information, claiming Holloway was buried under a house's foundation, which was later proven untrue. Following his conviction in Peru, van der Sloot faced charges in the U.S. for extortion and wire fraud related to the Holloway case. In June 2023, he was temporarily extradited to the United States to face these charges. In June 2023, Joran van der Sloot was extradited from Peru to the United States to face charges of extortion and wire fraud related to the Natalee Holloway case. These charges stemmed from a 2010 incident where van der Sloot attempted to extort $250,000 from Holloway's mother, Beth Holloway, in exchange for information about her daughter's remains. He accepted $25,000, but provided false information, claiming Holloway was buried under a house's foundation, which was later proven untrue. On October 18, 2023, as part of a plea deal in the extortion case, van der Sloot provided a detailed confession regarding Holloway's disappearance. He admitted to killing Holloway on a beach in Aruba after she rejected his sexual advances. In a fit of rage, he bludgeoned her with a cinder block and disposed of her body in the ocean. Van der Sloot's confession was corroborated by a polygraph test, which he passed, and was witnessed by Holloway's parents. The confession provided long-awaited closure to the family after 18 years of uncertainty. Following the confession, van der Sloot was sentenced to 20 years in U.S. federal prison for extortion and wire fraud. This sentence is to run concurrently with his existing 28-year sentence in Peru for the 2010 murder of Stephanie Flores. After the U.S. proceedings concluded, van der Sloot was returned to Peru to continue serving his sentence. Meredith Susanna Cara Kircher was born on December 28, 1985, in Southwark, South London, to John and Arlene Kircher. Raised in a close-knit family with 3 siblings, Meredith was described as bright, independent, and sociable. Her father worked as a journalist, while her mother was a homemaker. Meredith grew up in Coulsdon, a suburb of Croydon, and attended local schools where she was known for her academic diligence and friendly personality. She later pursued higher education at the University of Leeds, where she studied European politics and Italian. Fluent in several languages and passionate about travel, Meredith was selected to participate in the Erasmus program, an academic exchange initiative funded by the European Union. In September 2007, she relocated to Perugia, a central Italian city with a large student population, to complete her year abroad. Perugia was known for its medieval architecture and international community. It was considered a safe and vibrant city, particularly attractive to foreign students due to its prestigious university for foreigners. Meredith enrolled in language and cultural courses and shared a house in the San Francesco d'Assisi district with 3 other young women, 2 Italian law students and an American, Amanda Knox. Friends and professors describe Meredith as warm, intelligent, and respectful of cultural boundaries. She remained in close contact with her family, regularly communicating through calls and emails. In Italy, she balanced her studies with an active social life, often spending time with classmates and attending local events. Her academic performance was consistent, and she quickly adapted to her new environment. Meredith's time in Perugia, however, would be tragically cut short. On November 1st, 2007, just 2 months after her arrival, Meredith was murdered in the house she shared with her roommates. Her death would spark an international legal saga, attract widespread media attention, and lead to one of the most scrutinized criminal investigations of the 21st century. Meredith Kircher arrived in Perugia in early September 2007 to begin her Erasmus year at the University for Foreigners. Located in central Italy, Perugia was a medieval city with narrow streets and steep hills, known for its universities and cosmopolitan student population. The Erasmus program provided a structured setting for international students, offering language and culture courses alongside opportunities to immerse in local life. Meredith moved into a house at Via della Pergola 7, located near the university and within walking distance from Perugia's historic center. The house was divided into 2 separate apartments. Meredith shared the upstairs flat with Amanda Knox, an American student from Seattle, and 2 Italian women, Filomena Romanelli and Laura Mizzetti. Below them lived a group of young Italian men. The residence was modest but functional, with shared common areas and personal bedrooms for each tenant. Amanda Knox, also in Perugia for language study, had met Meredith through mutual Erasmus acquaintances. Their early interactions were reportedly friendly, and the 2 began living together shortly after Amanda responded to an open room listing. The roommates developed a routine of shared chores and social outings, occasionally going out together or hosting friends. While cultural and linguistic differences existed, there were no documented disputes in the early weeks. During her first weeks, Meredith quickly built a social network, attending university classes and spending time with other Erasmus students. She also began a brief romantic involvement with a young Italian man named Giacomo Silenzi, one of the downstairs neighbors. According to friends, Meredith was adjusting well and enjoying her time abroad. She had already participated in several university events and excursions and expressed excitement about experiencing Italian culture. Perugia's international student community offered a welcoming environment with numerous social gatherings, local festivals, and nightlife options. Students frequently met at cafes, bars, and piazzas. Meredith was described by peers as cheerful, friendly, and grounded, someone who enjoyed socializing but maintained clear boundaries and remained focused on her studies. In the weeks leading up to November 1st, Meredith followed a stable routine that included attending classes, studying, and spending time with friends. There were no known signs of trouble or serious conflict in her life at that time. She stayed in regular contact with her family, who later noted her upbeat tone and enthusiasm about the experience. As October came to a close, Meredith's integration into Perugia's student life appeared smooth and promising. Thursday, November 1st, 2007, was a national holiday in Italy, All Saints' Day. Classes at the University for Foreigners were canceled, and students took advantage of the break. Earlier that day, Meredith Kircher exchanged text messages with her British friends, making tentative plans for the evening. Ultimately, she declined an invitation to a party, telling a friend she felt tired and intended to stay home. Meredith spent the day with her friends, reportedly watching a movie and eating dinner at one of their apartments. Around 8:45 p.m., she walked back alone to her house at Via della Pergola. Witnesses later stated that she appeared calm and in good spirits. That night, she returned to an otherwise empty home. Her roommates Filomena Romanelli and Laura Mizzetti were away for the weekend, and Amanda Knox was at Rafael Solicito's apartment, a short distance away. Amanda Knox, a 20-year-old American student, had been dating Rafael, a computer science student, for about a week. They claimed they spent the night at his apartment, smoking marijuana, watching a movie, cooking, and sleeping in. Their alibis would become central to the investigation. At approximately 8:45 p.m., Meredith received a call from her mother in London. The conversation lasted a few minutes, and Meredith reportedly mentioned being tired. She was last seen alive shortly after that. Around 9:30 p.m., witnesses near the house heard what sounded like a scream. This would later become a critical detail in reconstructing the timeline of the crime. The following morning, Amanda Knox returned to the Via della Pergola house. She claimed to have noticed the front door ajar and found unusual signs inside: drops of blood in the bathroom sink, an unflushed toilet, and Meredith's bedroom door locked. Amanda contacted Rafael Solicito, and they returned together to the house, eventually calling the police. Meanwhile, Filomena Romanelli arrived and, noticing the disarray, insisted the bedroom door be forced open. Meredith's body was discovered lying on the floor, partially clothed and covered with a duvet. Police and forensic teams arrived shortly thereafter, beginning what would become one of Italy's most controversial criminal investigations. The scene inside the room revealed signs of a violent struggle. Meredith had suffered multiple injuries, including a fatal stab wound to the neck. Blood was found on the floor, walls, and in the bathroom. Her phone, which had been missing, was found abandoned in a nearby garden by a neighbor and turned over to authorities. The events of that night, from Meredith's last known movements to the circumstances of the discovery, would shape the trajectory of the case. Initial inconsistencies in testimonies and early investigative missteps would further complicate what quickly became a high-profile murder investigation with global implications. On the morning of November 2nd, 2007, Amanda Knox returned to the house she shared with Meredith Kircher. According to her later statements, she found the front door slightly open and noticed signs that raised concern. blood in the bathroom sink, a smear on the bath mat, and an unflushed toilet with feces. Despite these irregularities, she took a shower and then returned to Rafael Solicito's apartment. Around 12:30 p.m., Knox and Solicito went back to Via della Pergola. Knox reportedly attempted to reach Meredith by knocking on her locked bedroom door and calling her name, but there was no response. Growing uneasy, they called Meredith's roommate Filomena Romanelli, who promptly came over with friends. Upon arrival, Filomena noted a window in her room was broken and her belongings were scattered. This appeared to indicate a burglary. Filomena urged that Meredith's door be forced open. Raffaele Solicito called the Carabinieri, Italy's military police, at 12:51 p.m. Meanwhile, 2 postal police officers had already arrived at the house to return Meredith's phones, which had been found earlier that morning by a neighbor in a nearby garden. When officers entered the house, they were informed of the suspicious conditions. Despite initial confusion over jurisdiction, they remained while Solicito broke down Meredith's door. Inside, they discovered Meredith's body lying on the floor, partially covered by a blood-soaked duvet. She was fully clothed from the waist up, but naked from the waist down. There were signs of a violent struggle. Her room was in disarray, and blood was splattered on the floor and walls. Meredith's throat had been deeply slashed, and there were numerous bruises and cuts on her body. A pillow stained with blood had been placed under her head. Authorities quickly secured the scene. Forensic experts began collecting evidence, photographing the room, and noting anything that could establish a timeline. Meredith's body was removed for autopsy. Early findings indicated that she had died from a combination of blood loss and asphyxiation caused by the neck wound. She had also sustained injuries consistent with a sexual assault, although findings on that point would later become a subject of dispute. The rest of the house was searched for evidence. Investigators focused on the broken window in Filomena's room, initially suspecting a burglary. However, they quickly questioned that theory. Glass shards were found on top of clothes and objects on the floor, suggesting the window may have been broken from the inside after the room was already ransacked. This led police to consider the possibility of a staged break-in. Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito gave statements to police at the scene and were later taken in for further questioning. Their behavior was noted by officers and media alike. Knox was seen kissing Solicito outside the house, appearing detached to some observers. These impressions, along with inconsistencies in their statements and emerging forensic results, would influence the direction of the investigation in the days that followed. Following the discovery of Meredith Kircher's body, Italian police launched a full-scale investigation. Within hours, attention turned to Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito, primarily due to inconsistencies in their statements and perceived irregularities in their behavior. Knox initially told police she had spent the night at Solicito's apartment. However, under further questioning, her account began to shift. On November 5, 2007, Solicito retracted parts of his earlier statement, claiming he could not confirm Amanda had been with him the entire evening. He said she had left his apartment at one point, which contradicted her original alibi. That same night, Amanda was interrogated again. In a written statement, she said she had been in the house during Meredith's murder and implicated her employer, Patrick Lumumba, the owner of the Le Chic bar where she worked part-time. Knox stated she heard Meredith scream and covered her ears while Lumumba allegedly entered Meredith's room. She claimed fear and confusion over what she had seen and heard. Based on this statement, Italian police arrested Amanda Knox, Rafael Solicito, and Patrick Lumumba on suspicion of murder and sexual assault. News of the arrest reached the media immediately. fueling widespread coverage across Italy and abroad. Patrick Lumumba, however, had a solid alibi. He was at his bar the entire night, corroborated by witnesses. Within days, he was released, and the focus narrowed again to Knox and Solicito. Investigators now faced a scenario with no proven motive and a complicated forensic trail. Police continued searching for another suspect, eventually identifying Rudy Herman Guede, a 20-year-old Ivorian man with a criminal history who had previously stayed at the downstairs apartment. Guede had fled Italy shortly after the murder, traveling to Germany. DNA evidence soon linked him to the crime scene. His fingerprints were found on Meredith's pillow, his DNA on her body and in her handbag. He was also tied to feces left in an unflushed toilet. An international arrest warrant was issued, and Guede was arrested in Germany on November 20th, 2007. He was extradited to Italy shortly thereafter. Meanwhile, Knox and Solicito remained in custody. Italian police pointed to several pieces of evidence: a kitchen knife found in Solicito's apartment, with Knox's DNA on the handle, and what was initially believed to be Meredith's DNA on the blade. Bloody footprints allegedly belonging to Solicito, and the theory that the break-in was staged to mislead investigators. Public interest intensified. Italian prosecutors, led by Giuliano Mignini, pursued a theory involving a group attack during a supposed sex game gone wrong, though this narrative would later face significant scrutiny. Knox and Solicito consistently denied any involvement. Despite lacking a clear motive, they were formally charged with murder, sexual assault, and staging a crime scene. Rudy Guede would face a separate fast-track trial. The arrests marked the beginning of a prolonged and contested legal battle in which evidence, media pressure, and judicial interpretation would play critical roles in shaping the course of justice. As the investigation progressed, prosecutors focused their case against Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito on a combination of forensic, circumstantial, and behavioral evidence. Central to their theory was that Knox, Solicito, and Rudy Guede had jointly attacked Meredith Kircher in her bedroom during a violent confrontation, possibly triggered by sexual or interpersonal tensions. This interpretation was publicly advanced by lead prosecutor Giuliano Mignini. One of the most discussed pieces of evidence was a kitchen knife recovered from Solicito's apartment. Forensic analysis by Italy's scientific police identified Amanda Knox's DNA on the handle and what was initially believed to be Meredith's DNA on the blade. Prosecutors argued this was the murder weapon, though defense experts later disputed both the reliability of the DNA results and whether the knife matched Meredith's wounds. Footprints also became key to the case. Investigators found bloody footprints on the bathroom mat and hallway floor, which forensic analysts claimed matched Solicito's foot size. Additional luminol-enhanced footprints were discovered, allegedly made by Knox and Solicito. These footprints did not contain visible blood, but were consistent with a cleaning agent, suggesting a possible attempt to clean the crime scene. Defense attorneys challenged the reliability of these results, citing issues with luminol's chemical sensitivity. Another crucial element was the alleged staging of a break-in. Investigators noted that the broken window in Filomena Romanelli's bedroom appeared suspicious. Glass shards lay atop scattered items, suggesting the window was broken after the room was already ransacked. Police concluded the break-in was faked to mislead them. Since Rudy Guede had no known reason to stage such a break-in, prosecutors argued this implicated Knox and Solicito. Knox's behavior was also scrutinized. Observers, including police and journalists, reported that she appeared overly casual after the murder. Surveillance footage showed her and Solicito kissing outside the house while police worked inside. She was seen doing cartwheels in the police station waiting area and showed inconsistent emotional responses. Although such behavior is subjective, prosecutors used it to support their narrative that she lacked remorse. Her statements during early interrogations also raised concern. Knox initially implicated bar owner Patrick Lumumba, who had an alibi and was released after 2 weeks in jail. Knox later retracted the claim, saying it was made under coercion during a lengthy, unrecorded interrogation. She maintained her innocence and claimed her statements were misinterpreted and the result of intense pressure. In contrast, Solicito's defense focused on inconsistencies in his timeline. His claim that Knox had spent the night at his apartment shifted over time. Police said Solicito's computer and mobile phone showed no activity during the critical hours of the night. However, no definitive evidence placed either him or Knox at the crime scene during the murder. Despite the absence of a clear motive or eyewitness, prosecutors believe the combination of forensic traces, inconsistencies in alibis, and circumstantial indicators constituted sufficient grounds for prosecution. Their case advanced toward trial as public opinion and media narratives fueled interest and speculation, both in Italy and abroad. Rudy Herman Guaida, a 20-year-old Ivory Coast native who had lived in Italy since childhood, became a central figure in the investigation after forensic evidence placed him at the scene of Meredith Kercher's murder. Guad had a criminal record for petty thefts and had previously stayed at the downstairs apartment in the same house where Meredith and her roommates lived. After the murder, Guade abruptly left Italy, traveling to Germany. On November 20th, 2007, he was arrested in the city of Mainz following the issuance of a European arrest warrant. Guade admitted to being in the house the night of the murder, but denied killing Meredith. He claimed he and Meredith had arranged to meet and that they began a consensual encounter. According to his account, he had gone to the bathroom when he heard Meredith scream. Upon returning, he said he saw an unknown man fleeing and found Meredith bleeding and dying. Guad's version was contradicted by forensic evidence. His DNA was found inside Meredith's body, on her bra clasp, handbag, and clothing, as well as in the bathroom. His bloody handprint was discovered on a pillow under Meredith's body. Feces matching his DNA were found in an unflushed toilet. Unlike Knox and Solicito, whose DNA presence was more contested, Guide's biological traces were clear and abundant throughout the scene. In October 2008, Guide was tried separately in a fast-track proceeding, a process that allows for a shorter trial in exchange for reduced sentencing. Prosecutors argued he had participated in a joint attack with Knox and Solicito, a theory consistent with their narrative of multiple attackers. Guidi maintained his innocence, insisting that although he was present, the murder was committed by someone else. The court found Guide guilty of sexual assault and murder. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison, later reduced to 16 years on appeal. The ruling acknowledged that Guide had not acted alone, but did not definitively state who his accomplices were. The judges noted the brutal nature of the attack and emphasized the forensic evidence linking him to the scene. Guide's conviction became a cornerstone of the broader case. Prosecutors used it to reinforce their claim that Knox and Solicito were also involved, arguing that the nature of Meredith's injuries and the disarray at the scene indicated multiple attackers. Critics of the case later questioned this theory, pointing out that the crime could have been committed by a single assailant, and that Guade had both motive and opportunity. Guade served most of his sentence in Viterbo prison. He was released in late 2021 after serving 13 years, having obtained partial day release privileges and employment outside prison during his final years. His role in the crime continues to be debated, particularly in light of the later acquittals of Knox and Solicito. Throughout, Guidi maintained that Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito were present during the murder. However, his credibility was challenged due to inconsistencies in his accounts and the legal advantages gained from his fast-track trial. Despite this, his conviction remained the only one to stand unchallenged in the Italian legal system. From the earliest days of the investigation, the murder of Meredith Kercher received intense and sustained media attention, both in Italy and internationally. The involvement of foreign students, the alleged sexual context of the crime, and the dramatic shifts in the narrative created a media spectacle unlike any other contemporary case. Coverage quickly focused on Amanda Knox, whose background, demeanor, and shifting statements drew particular scrutiny. Italian tabloids dubbed Knox Foxy Knoxy, a nickname she had used in a childhood soccer profile, but which was repurposed to imply sexual cunning. Her behavior in the aftermath of the murder, including public displays of affection with Rafael Solicito and perceived lack of grief, was portrayed as inappropriate and suspicious. Italian outlets often emphasized alleged cultural differences, painting Knox as morally ambiguous or manipulative. British media, in contrast, focused on Meredith Kercher and the grief of her family. Newspapers published sympathetic portraits of Meredith, highlighting her academic achievements, character, and the pain of her parents and siblings. Some outlets criticized the Italian police and judicial process, questioning the strength of the case and the treatment of the suspects. Others echoed the narrative of a dangerous love triangle or a sex game gone wrong. American media coverage became polarized. Initial reports were influenced by Italian sources, but as doubts about the investigation emerged, U.S. outlets became more critical of the prosecution. Advocacy for Knox grew, especially after her family launched a campaign to support her defense, arguing that she was being railroaded by an unfamiliar and flawed legal system. Prominent journalists and legal analysts questioned the evidence, interrogation tactics, and media bias. The saturation of coverage influenced public opinion and, arguably, judicial proceedings. The courtroom in Perugia became a focal point for camera crews, reporters, and commentators. Knox's family hired a public relations firm to help manage her image, a move that sparked further debate. Meredith's family, meanwhile, expressed distress at the media focus shifting away from their daughter and toward the suspects. In Italy, the case became emblematic of broader cultural and legal tensions. Some viewed Knox as a symbol of foreign arrogance, while others saw her as a victim of prosecutorial overreach. The sensationalism of the trial created a charged environment where speculation often outpaced facts. Books, documentaries, and television specials proliferated. Journalists like Barbalatza Nadeau and Nina Burley published detailed accounts of the case. Netflix released a documentary in 2016 titled Amanda Knox, which further explored the media's role and featured interviews with Knox and others involved. The coverage did not wane, even after the trials concluded. Instead, it became a lasting component of how the case was perceived globally. This media frenzy, unprecedented in its volume and duration, shaped not only public understanding of the events, but arguably influenced how investigators, prosecutors, and judges framed their arguments. The case remains a defining example of how journalism, public perception, and justice intersect in high-profile criminal trials. The trial of Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito began in January 2009 at the Court of Assizes in Perugia. The prosecution, led by Giuliano Mignini and Manuela Comodi, accused the two of murdering Meredith Kircher in conjunction with Rudy Goed. They asserted the crime had been a group attack during a violent altercation, possibly stemming from a sex game or argument. The prosecution's case rested on several pillars: Knox's shifting statements, alleged inconsistencies in both suspects' alibis, forensic evidence such as DNA and footprints, and the interpretation of the crime scene as having been staged. Mignini reiterated the claim that the break-in had been faked to suggest a robbery, and that the murder weapon was the knife found in Sollecito's kitchen. Forensic expert Patrizia Stefanoni testified that Meredith's DNA was found on the blade of the knife and Knox's DNA on the handle. Additional traces of Knox's DNA were reportedly found on a faucet, while a mixed DNA sample containing both Meredith's and Knox's profiles was found on the bidet and drain. Sollecito's DNA was said to be on Meredith's bra clasp, which had been collected 46 days after the murder. The defense challenged the reliability of this evidence. Experts pointed out that the bra clasp had been moved around the room before being collected, potentially contaminating it. The knife, they argued, was incompatible with some of the wounds on Meredith's body, and the amount of DNA on the blade was exceedingly small. Independent analysts later described the DNA results as inconclusive or below accepted scientific thresholds. Witness testimony also played a role. Several witnesses placed Knox and Sollecito near the crime scene, though many accounts conflicted or were imprecise. A homeless man claimed he saw the couple near the house on the night of the murder, but his timeline was uncertain. Others offered ambiguous sightings, adding to the confusion rather than resolving it. Knox's demeanor in court was widely reported. She often appeared composed, occasionally emotional. She took the stand in her defense, asserting her innocence and explaining the pressures of police interrogations that led to false statements. Sollecito also testified, denying any involvement and reaffirming his relationship with Knox as one of intimacy and routine, not violence. On December 4th, 2009, after nearly a year of proceedings, the court found Amanda Knox and Rafael Sollecito guilty of murder and sexual assault. Knox received a 26-year sentence, and Sollecito was sentenced to 25 years. The court also convicted Knox of defamation for falsely accusing Patrick Lumumba, adding 1 year to her sentence. The verdict shocked many observers. While some in Italy supported the decision, others, especially abroad, voiced strong doubts. Legal experts criticized the handling of evidence, and advocacy groups began pushing for appeals. The Kircher family, present in court, expressed quiet relief at the conviction, emphasizing their desire for justice for Meredith, rather than public spectacle. Despite the conviction, the case was far from over. The appeals process in Italy permits a full re-examination of evidence, witnesses, and expert testimony. Knox and Sollecito's legal teams vowed to fight the decision, setting the stage for a dramatic reversal in the years to come. In Italy, the appellate process allows for a full review of both legal and factual aspects of a case. Amanda Knox and Rafael Sollecito filed appeals shortly after their 2009 convictions. The second-level trial began in November 2010 at the Court of Assizes of Appeal in Perugia, presided over by Judge Claudio Pratillo Hellman. Key to the appeal was the court's decision to appoint independent experts to re-examine the contested forensic evidence. Carla Vecchiotti and Stefano Conti, experts from Rome's Sapienza University, were tasked with re-evaluating two crucial items: the kitchen knife said to contain Meredith Kircher's DNA and the bra clasp attributed to Sollecito. Their report, released in July 2011, strongly criticized the original forensic procedures. The experts concluded the knife had no traceable DNA from Meredith, and that the amount detected was too low and possibly contaminated. As for the bra clasp, they noted that it had not been properly stored, was collected 6 weeks after the crime, and was handled by multiple investigators without gloves. They described the DNA analysis as unreliable and called into question the integrity of the evidence. The defense also re-examined the timeline in witness testimony. They argued there was no credible evidence placing Knox and Solicito at the crime scene during the critical time window. Video surveillance from a nearby parking garage showed no sign of either arriving or departing during the estimated time of the murder. Furthermore, new analysis of Solicito's computer activity suggested potential use during the night, contradicting claims he was inactive. On October 3, 2011, the appellate court overturned the murder convictions of Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito. The ruling cited the absence of reliable evidence, procedural errors, and failure to prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Knox was also cleared of the sexual assault charge but retained the defamation conviction for implicating Patrick Lumumba. The court's decision led to immediate release. Knox, having spent nearly 4 years in custody, returned to the United States the next day. Solicito also walked free. Outside the courtroom, reactions were sharply divided. Supporters cheered what they saw as a victory for justice and due process, while some in Italy expressed frustration, believing the original verdict had been correct. The Kircher family, visibly shaken, stated that the decision added to their pain and confusion. They maintained that their focus remained on seeking truth for Meredith. Italian prosecutors, unhappy with the outcome, appealed the acquittal to the Court of Cassation, Italy's highest court. The case was far from resolved. International media once again turned its attention to Perugia. The acquittal fueled debates over Italian justice, media influence, and forensic standards. Advocacy groups that had campaigned for Knox's release celebrated, while others questioned how the courts could have arrived at such divergent conclusions using the same evidence. The 2011 acquittal marked a major turning point, but the legal process in Italy allows multiple levels of appeal. As Knox and Solicito sought to rebuild their lives, the case entered a new, uncertain phase. The final word on guilt or innocence had not yet been spoken. Despite the 2011 acquittal of Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito, the legal process in Italy continued. In March 2013, Italy's Court of Cassation, the nation's highest court, annulled the acquittals and ordered a new appeal trial. The ruling cited inconsistencies in the Perugia appellate court's reasoning and argued that some pieces of evidence had not been properly evaluated. The retrial was assigned to the Florence Court of Assizes of Appeal and began in September 2013. Although Knox remained in the United States and was tried in absentia, Solicito appeared in court. The prosecution once again emphasized the original theory of a group assault, presenting the same forensic and circumstantial evidence that had led to the 2009 conviction. In January 2014, the Florence Appeals Court reconvicted both Knox and Solicito of murder. Knox was sentenced to 28 years and 6 months, and Solicito to 25 years. The court reaffirmed the prosecution's theory of a joint attack with Rudy Guede, concluding that the evidence, though heavily disputed, was sufficient to establish guilt. Solicito was briefly detained near the Austrian border after the ruling, raising concerns he might flee the country. He was released shortly after, when no legal grounds for detainment were found. Knox, meanwhile, issued statements from the U.S., maintaining her innocence and vowing to continue her legal fight. Her defense argued that the prosecution's case was based on flawed forensic interpretations and unsupported theories. Both Knox and Solicito appealed the reconviction to the Court of Cassation. On March 27, 2015, in a final and definitive ruling, the court overturned the murder convictions for both. The judges cited stunning flaws in the investigation and an absence of concrete evidence linking either defendant to the crime scene. They concluded that the case against Knox and Solicito lacked both motive and physical proof. The decision was notable for its strongly worded criticism of the prosecution. The court found that the case was marked by investigative missteps, misinterpretations of evidence, and a failure to uphold the standard of proof required in a murder conviction. The defamation charge against Knox, however, was upheld, reaffirming her false accusation of Patrick Lumumba. This final acquittal ended the criminal process for Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito. Under Italian law, the Court of Cassation's ruling is binding and not subject to further appeal. The verdict closed a nearly 8-year legal saga marked by conflicting decisions, media scrutiny, and international debate over the fairness of the Italian justice system. Reactions to the ruling were mixed. Knox expressed relief and gratitude, calling the ordeal a nightmare finally over. Solicito described the verdict as a return to dignity. Meredith Kircher's family, while accepting the legal outcome, expressed ongoing sorrow and frustration, noting that unanswered questions remained and that justice felt incomplete. The 2015 acquittal did not erase the years Knox and Solicito had spent under suspicion, but it formally cleared them of involvement in the murder. The decision underscored the complexity of the case and the challenges of reconciling justice with the limitations of forensic and circumstantial evidence. Following their definitive acquittal in 2015, Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito began rebuilding their lives, though the effects of their years-long legal ordeal endured. Knox returned to the United States, eventually graduating from the University of Washington. She became a writer and public speaker, focusing on wrongful convictions and criminal justice reform. In 2016, she released a memoir, Waiting to be Heard, and participated in the Netflix documentary Amanda Knox, which examined the case and its media treatment. Solicito also returned to private life in Italy. He earned a degree in computer engineering and wrote a memoir, Honor Bound, detailing his experience. While he expressed gratitude for his exoneration, he remained critical of the Italian judicial process and the stigma that persisted despite his legal vindication. Both he and Knox spoke publicly about the psychological and reputational damage caused by the accusations and years spent under legal scrutiny. The Kircher family, devastated by Meredith's death, continued to honor her memory. They established a scholarship fund and spoke publicly about their desire for privacy and respectful remembrance of Meredith's life. In interviews, they expressed disappointment that the full truth of the events leading to her death might never be fully understood. Their focus remained on the loss of their daughter and the enduring pain it brought. Rudy Guidi, whose conviction for the murder stood throughout all proceedings, served 13 years of a 16-year sentence. He was granted partial release privileges in his final years and was released from prison in 2021. Guade continued to assert his innocence regarding the killing, despite the court's firm conclusions and forensic evidence tying him to the crime. His role remains a focal point for those who believe the case was mishandled or remains unresolved. Legal and forensic experts continue to debate the case's handling. Critics highlight flawed investigative procedures, questionable forensic practices, and the role of public pressure on the prosecution. Supporters of the original conviction maintain that the presence of multiple individuals at the crime scene, as suggested by early judgments, was never adequately disproven. The case became a textbook example in legal circles of how media coverage, cultural misunderstandings, and prosecutorial narrative can influence judicial outcomes. Numerous documentaries, articles, and books have dissected each phase of the case, reinforcing its status as one of the most polarizing and scrutinized trials in modern European history. In 2019, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Amanda Knox's rights had been violated during early interrogations. The court ordered Italy to pay compensation, citing the absence of legal counsel and inadequate translation. The decision validated long-standing concerns about how her statements were obtained and used. Years after Meredith Kercher's murder, the case still evokes strong opinions. For some, it represents a miscarriage of justice initially corrected through perseverance and legal advocacy. For others, it remains a disturbing and unresolved tragedy. What is certain is that Meredith's death continues to leave a lasting legacy on her family, those accused, and the broader discussion of justice under intense public scrutiny.